City Council meeting. We continue to host hybrid meetings to keep everyone healthy and safe. Our meetings are public, and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. Today is a work session during which there is no public comment. If you'd like to give public comment, join us on February 21st at 7 p.m. during our formal meeting. And of course, at any time, you can mail us at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or you can email us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or reach our 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. Any comments that we receive on agenda-related topics will be shared with all council members and posted on our website, slccouncil.com. Now we will begin our work session, and the first agenda item is our usual updates from the administration. Today, it looks like we have Rachel Otto.
Tim's joining me.
Tim Cosgrove from the mayor's office. Welcome, thank you.
And thank you very much. I believe Andrew Johnston is online for this portion as well.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
And I think we have a few slides, as usual. Do we have a few slides? Oh, here they are. Thank you, Scott. So moving ahead to the first slide, please. Thank you. So I think with council's permission, we will probably not do COVID slides after today unless something major changes. But
that's great.
Just one slide today is continuing to show a good trend, 15% down over the last 2 weeks, a little bit up in Utah, but nothing to be significantly concerned about. And as always, the vaccination information. But at any time, if you want us to start doing different information on the public health piece, please just make sure to reach out. I'll hand it over to, I think Tim is next.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, council members. Nice to be with you this afternoon. You're aware of our feedback, our community engagement, that you can access information. Oh, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you.
Tim, you'll have to speak up just a little bit.
Okay.
For people, there you go.
Thank you. So you know how to get to the feedbacks that provides all the other information that we work on from outreach. Next slide. There's 2 items that we received. One from planning, our non-complying sign amendments. The non-complying sign amendments will update regulations for non-complying signs to make it easier to maintain, update, and reuse existing signs. This will help small businesses save money when occupying existing spaces where a sign already exists. This engagement started at the beginning of the month, and it will end March 23rd. The other item is the landscape chapter update. This will update the entire landscape chapter in zoning code to simplify the regulations and promote water conservation, reduce our heat island effects, and improve stormwater management. This engagement also started at the beginning of this month and will end on March 27th. We received one from Transportation. In 2024, West Temple reconstruction will rehabilitate aged pavement from South Temple to 200 South. The initial public comment period has closed, and Transportation Division team recently met with the Marriott Downtown and City Creek Mall to discuss concept design revisions that were based on the initial input. The team is finalizing the concept design based on some of that feedback, and then we'll pass the project over to our engineer division for full design and construction planning. Again, construction will begin in 2024. Next slide, please. As you know, we have our community office hours that our liaisons get out to the community, listen to the concerns. We still have 5 remaining community office hour times, and we'd love to have you send the community to us, to our attention. I'll personally be at the Patagonia outlet up on Highland Drive on Tuesday the 21st from 2 to 4. So welcome you all to come out and send people to talk to us there as well. And I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Josh Raboyo. You know Josh in our office as outreach. He puts together our weekly newsletter, Stay Connected. And if you haven't had an opportunity to check in on that lately, check in on this week. He did a real fabulous job with our community office hours, our NBL Star weekend, the UTA Zero Fair, our ballpark next design competition, and some of the construction updates. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Andrew next. Maybe.
Andrew? Mr. Chair, while they connect, I just wanted to also do a shout
Councilmember.
out, is that okay? For Allison Dupler with one of your departments, which I can't remember which one right now that is, but she's been doing all of the resource fairs for our unsheltered friends and Pioneer Park, and the one last Friday was at Library Square. It was really organized, it was well attended, and she's going to continue to do that. So congratulations to all of you and to her for doing that. And she's inspiring, and maybe we'll put volunteer groups together as well in District 4 whenever that happens. So thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Thanks, Allison Dupler.
Have we seen Andrew join online yet?
Andrew.
If not, then we can quickly just go through the slides, and
Sure.
if you have questions, I
Well-
can have him follow up with you.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Let's do that.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the quick update on homelessness this weekend is, as you know, over 100,000 visitors are anticipated here. All HRC and overflow providers are increasing capacity and daytime options. And this is, what we plan for with our partners whenever we have, a large influx of people downtown. It's always part of the planning process in the event that, people are not able to feel displaced from where they are. So that's always part of the planning process. The HRC and the overflow providers are increasing capacity, daytime options, so that to just offer a place for people to go. Rapid intervention and EIM planned for 990 South and 5th West. The outreach and engagement at 9 different locations this week, 10 site rehabilitations this week with the rapid intervention team. The resource fair, Friday the 10th at Library Square, will have 16 providers. The next one is March 10th, TBD. Thank you very much, Councilmember Valdemoros, for the shout out to Allison Dupler. Next slide, please. So Andrew really should talk about this, so we'll have him stick it into the next presentation that he does with you. This is an attempt to answer some questions about the Miami model and the sequential intercept that we've been working on with our county and state providers and partners. This is really to try to identify all of the different ways that we all intersect with people experiencing homelessness and their entry or diversion from the justice system. So since he put this slide together, and I'll probably just confuse things if I try to talk about it, we'll flag that for the next time. And I'm not sure if there's a next slide or not. That looks like it.
Andrew.
Oh, there's Andrew. Good.
Apologize. You started quicker than I thought you would. So Rachel went through that quickly, which is great. I know there were some questions the council members had about sequential intercept, and I want to do this is just a precursor for some other discussions we'll have this year. But the real simple idea around this is you try and divert people into the appropriate services or places for their needs at every level possible. In this case, we're talking about the criminal justice system primarily, and it overlaps in with behavioral health, mental health, and substance use treatment. So you see the top starts at 0 down to 5, 0 being the least restrictive, front lines kind of thing, 5 being probably the later in the process. 0 in our county looks like a crisis line, a phone line. The mobile crisis outreach teams and receiving center, which we've talked about previously, along with things like social detox, things that people can voluntarily get into and access when they need it real time. And they're not necessarily restrictive, so you don't get sort of locked into something. You reach out for help, you get the help you need, you leave. And this should service most people. It should have a very high volume of folks and be accessed repeatedly for people as they need it. It's great preventative work in our system. We have some of that already here. You'll also notice as we go through all of these, we've got a lot of good elements. What we've probably not had in the past is the scale and the volume of these services that we need for a county of our size. We've got 1.2 million people, and we really don't have enough of each of these things for everybody there. So a lot of our efforts will be to increase what we see on this screen. Intercept 1 would be sort of first interaction with law enforcement. That means like crisis intervention trained law enforcement, CIT officers. That means us and every jurisdiction in this county, theoretically, should have a lot of folks trained in how to de-escalate, work with folks with mental illness or substance use issues, do a lot of preventative sort of de-escalation work with people as they interact with them. But it also means specialized groups like our Community Connection Center folks, social workers. Folks are going to interact with people on the front lines, and before it gets to an arrest situation, help diffuse or move them back to intercept 0, refer back to the crisis line, to the receiving center, to detox, those kind of things, before they move towards criminal justice interventions that way. Intercept 2 would be more when you get to the jail. What happens there? Do you get assessed quickly and moved out of the jail to a treatment program? In our case, the receiving center would be a good place here, an alternative to jail. But it also means like specialized response teams through Valley Behavioral Health, pretrial services who are in the jails as well. Everybody who gets there before you actually get booked into jail or stay in jail, or if you are booked, get released into a more appropriate treatment setting while you're awaiting the next phase in the criminal justice system. Intercept 3 would be the actual jails and courts, and that's where we have a lot of things like our specialty courts, homeless court, drug court, mental health court, family court, veterans court. We've got a lot of these things in place. We probably need to expand them. But it also means case coordinators, people who can specifically help people navigate through the courts and fulfill legal obligations while getting the help they need. And if they fall out, finding them and bring them back in so they're not left on warrants or other things, ideally. Intercept 4 is when you get released from jail, like everybody is eventually, county jail at least. Anti-recidivism programs. And we've got some of those already in the county. Need more of them, obviously. So that there's a warm handoff out of jail with, say, medications, with case management, everything you need to not fall off that cliff and end up back in that spin cycle again. And then Intercept 5 is really that long-term piece, and it's missing a little on the slide here, but adult probation on parole, sort of community treatment teams, that's peer support programs, that's treatment programs in the community like a First Step House and Odyssey House, that's housing programs. A lot of programs that are based around supporting people who have behavioral health conditions or situations that can stabilize them so they don't end up violating court orders or going back into the system again for noncompliance or because they have to get jailed again. This is the basic idea. Now, you could take the same idea, and we're going to work on this particular thing with Salt Lake County taking the lead, Criminal Justice Advisory Council. But you can take the same concept and move it to homeless services. First interaction with folks on the street, what do? Instead of law enforcement going into jail for minor things, do we find other appropriate services and intervene that way? When they prevention you've talked about as a council about preventing homelessness and housing pieces. How do we prevent families or individuals from falling through the cracks to unsheltered homelessness? When they get to a shelter, how do we divert them away from the shelter into more appropriate options that are there? If they have to be in the shelter, how quickly do we get them out into services? You can see how this works, right? So the same concept I think will apply to multiple things, but this is a starter for you to understand as we get into further conversations this year, both what it is overall and also as a city and as a city council, what your role could or should be as you discuss what the city should invest in and spend time on.
Thanks, Andrew. Council members, any questions? Councilmember Pui.
I would love to see this document, this page right here, a little better. If there is a way to format it differently, I don't know if there is some spacing issues there. My brain didn't help catch some of these things. But thank you so much for working on this. This Miami project could be a game changer for us, and thank you to the administration for putting a lot of effort into this.
I do apologize for the formatting. It did get messed up somewhere in translation. It looked a lot better before.
Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions? Councilmember Fowler?
Thank you. And so with this sort is this, and you may have said this, and I apologize, I've sort of been randomly multitasking, speaking of clients. I was in court and now here, so my brain is still getting back to where I'm at. Is at these intercepts, is this something that the whole team has sort of come up with the county and the state, this model, or is this something that we are sort of planning, that you've been working on and planning to present to the whole team? And I ask this question because the real reason, the root of why I'm asking this question is all of this takes funding. And so is this something that we're coming up with to then present so then we can be like, hey, state, this is why we need all this money because we can't do it alone? Or do they already have the buy-in and they are like, yes, we know you're going to need all this money? Does that make sense? Am I rambling?
Yeah. If you look at the slide before it got messed up, I apologize. Everything in blue, crisis phone line, receiving center, anti-recidivism programs, et cetera, those are all things that currently exist in Salt Lake County. They are actual programs or funded things. And we wanted to bring that forward because the Miami model is based on something Salt Lake County's been trying for a number of years to do as well. So a lot of the funding is there. And I think Tim Whalen at Salt Lake County Behavioral Health would say that for the first time in a lot of years, there's actually quite a bit of money through Medicaid reimbursement options. One of the big limiting factors, as you're aware, is just staffing and people and workforce. And so in previous years before Medicaid expansion, we probably would have said, we need money. We need more funding, period, across the board for everything here. I won't say we don't need more money, particularly as you get down to the lower intercepts 4 and 5, where housing becomes a bigger piece. We definitely need more specialty housing and services around that. But Medicaid is very good for that. One thing as we go forward in a discussion with the city and the county and the state, is identifying what our roles are and where we look for funding, whether it's ourselves or other opportunities. That should be the active discussion going forward to fund the system in a stable way and ensure that we're not duplicating and we're not doing things that we're not prepared to do as a city. I think there's a way that we can play our roles and stay in our lanes and work together towards a coherent system. It's just going to take some time and some effort on our part.
Thanks, Andrew. All right. Thank you for the administrative updates. Let's move on to agenda item number 2, which is an ordinance amending the Parks, Natural Lands, Trails, and Urban Forestry Advisory Board. We will have Ashley Cleveland from Community Outreach, Kristen Riker from Public Lands, and Meredith Benali, PINA Advisory Board member, here with us. Or is it just Ashley and Kristen?
She can't sign on right now.
Oh, okay. Are we okay to go forward, or do we need to?
I think we're okay to go forward. I've been
All right,
texting
go
her.
ahead.
She's listening in, so.
Okay. Hello, Meredith.
Hi, Meredith.
Well, thanks, everyone. This is really great to be able to be here and present this to you. If Brian can pull up the slides, we just have very minimal slides here. Perfect. Perfect. Do you want to start?
Sure. So good to see you all. Happy Valentine's Day. We are here to speak to you guys about the amendment of 2.9040. It's the ordinance going over peanut and talking about at-large positions. Over the past year and a half, I have had the honor and the luxury and the privilege to get to know Indigenous leaders and residents here in Salt Lake City, and talking about how they would like to see relationships be built. It has been a long and thoughtful road, and we have started working group sessions that will continue from now until May. But in the interim, one of the things that we have really been having a discussion with our Public Lands Division on is designating 2 of 3 of our at-large seats for Peanut Advisory Board members to be of Indigenous representation, whether that is for our tribal leaders or people who are a part of Indigenous and Native American-led organizations here in Salt Lake City. So yeah.
Well, let's go to the next slide, please. This is just a photo of the mayor's office Indigenous and Native American Affairs meeting. On the next slide, if you will, Brian, thanks. So currently there are 10 members and 3 at-large members on the peanut board. There's 1 vacancy, it's an at-large vacancy. 2.94040 is board creation. That's the ordinance that we're addressing today. And it states that the board shall be comprised of 9 to 11 voting members. All appointments shall be made for the 3-year term, and 1 member of the board shall be appointed from each city council district and must reside in that council district. The remaining members of the board shall be appointed as at-large members. What we're adding here, and this is really at the request in part from the Peanut Board. This was presented to the Peanut Board in July and also again in August. So what we're proposing that at least 2 of such at-large members represent Indigenous tribes and organizations, and no more than 3 at-large members may live outside of Salt Lake City boundaries. When we spoke to the Peanut Board about this in July, we explained, and Ashley was great to be there and kind of explain the process that she's been going through, but it's a way for Public Lands to lean in on the conversation with representatives from our Indigenous community in Utah. We want them to be informed about our projects and the facilities and the resources that we have available, including projects such as the trails and Twin Peaks that has come up. And this will help us establish a more formal relationship with Indigenous folks in Utah with the Public Lands Department. So the only significant edit to the draft that the Peanut Board asked for is originally we had asked that 2 of the 4 members be specific to Indigenous community, and they said, well, let's just add 2 more positions to the Peanut Board. And so at the request, we made that edit to the proposed draft changes. And so instead of 11, it would be 13 total members on the Peanut Board, and that was applied to the ordinance that you're seeing today. And on August 4th, the board unanimously approved that amendment and the change. So that's all we have for you today on this, and we're happy to take questions.
Yes, happy to take questions.
Yes
Thank
and
you,
yes.
council members. Councilmember Valdemoros.
No, yes and yes. I don't think there's, at least for me, I don't think there's a lot of discussion
Councilmember
for this.
Fowler?
Is an obvious thing to do, so let's move forward with it.
So what I'm hearing, just real quick, I'm doing all the math. So there's 13, and then from what I read in the ordinance, there would be 7 that are districts.
Yes.
And then that would leave 5, right? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 36 that are at large. Is that right?
Yes. There's
And so
currently
then there
4
would be-
positions at large, so this would be 6 at large.
6 at large, and then there would be 2 from the Indigenous community. The other 4 could be anyone, but only 3 can be from outside of outside of Salt Lake City boundaries or Salt Lake County boundaries.
Outside of Salt Lake City boundaries.
Okay.
So,
A lot of math for me to do, but it sounds great, and I'm excited.
Excellent.
so the representatives from indigenous communities don't necessarily have to be of those three outside of Salt Lake City boundaries. They could be either in or outside of Salt Lake City boundaries.
Depending on what we already have on the makeup of the board.
The board. But, and could they also represent one of the districted positions? Or
Sure.
they must be, so just as long as there's two anywhere on the board, then we're
Yes.
meeting the ordinance.
Yes.
And there
Okay.
certainly could be more than two.
Yes, there could be more than two.
Of course. Great. Any other questions, council members? Sounds great to me as well. So thank you for bringing that to us and look forward to putting that in motion. Yeah, thank you. Our next item is item number 3. It's an informational update from Salt Lake County Animal Services, discussing the services that the county provides to Salt Lake City residents. We have at the table our council policy analyst, Sylvia Richards, Division Director of Salt Lake County Animal Services, Sir Talia Butler, excuse me, Carrie Seibert, Liaison and Contract Coordinator for Salt Lake County Animal Services, and Captain Randy Love, Field Manager for Animal Services. Did I miss anybody?
Nope.
Okay, great.
Carmen Bailey is in the audience.
In the
I believe,
audience.
From the administration.
Hi, Carmen. Go ahead.
This is mostly an informational opportunity for the council to learn more about animal services and the services they provide. And Talia has prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and I'd like to just turn that over to her so she can get through that, and then the council can ask questions.
Perfect. Thank you. And it's very nice to meet all of you. I think I've met some of you before, and if I've not, very nice to meet you. We'll just take a few moments of your time, but we wanted to give you guys an update on what's happening with animals. It's very nice that we meet you guys on Valentine's Day because we are the best matchmakers in the entire state. That is all we do every day, and we are very good at it. So it is a perfect day that we are here. If you'll go to the next slide, we wanted to meet with you guys because this year, 2023, kicks off a very important year for us. This 2013 was the first year that we were officially a no-kill shelter, and we have hit that target every year since. So 2023 makes our decade mark of no-kill sheltering. This is a super unique target for a municipal shelter, and Salt Lake City will be one of the only shelters in the country to achieve this goal, and especially for an epicenter city like Salt Lake City, this will be a nationally recognized achievement. So we want to make sure that we are doing a lot to highlight this year. So we have a lot planned to highlight this. We are doing some dog tail hours, so we want to plan some of these at your city hall. We'll have animals here in tuxedos and a whole bunch of events throughout the year to highlight this huge achievement. Just to give you guys, to put this in perspective, this is about 105,000 animals have been saved in the decade that we've been no-kill. So, I mean, this is a huge achievement. We're really excited. One other piece of this is Utah Faces, which was our nonprofit donor, became an endowment 3 years ago, and we are about $50,000 off from the $1 million mark on that endowment. That we want to hit that $1 million mark on that endowment also this year. So we've got a lot going on that as well. So just wanted to keep you guys in the loop on that. Throughout this year, we also are wanting to honor doing a 10 for 10. So basically, we're going to honor 10 contributors to our no-kill movement, whether that be cities, wink, wink, or contributors, rescues, businesses, just contributors to our mission. So just wanted to keep you guys in the loop on that, that is something that's happening throughout the year. Next slide, please. This is a list of the services that that we provide you, and we just want to make sure that you are aware of the services that we provide in case your constituents ask. So this is a list of the things that we provide. I did want to highlight some of the unique things that we have that are unusual. The 24/7 response and emergency response. This includes veterinarians. That means that if an animal is injured, that they will get veterinary response and that the animals will be taken care of. This is very important to us that an animal is treated if there is an injury. So this is something that we provide. Also, that we have a diversity of response. This means twofold diversity in our ability to handle any animal that comes in, whether that be a horse or a python or a dangerous animal, or whether that be multi-language, whatever that diversity is, we have the ability to respond. And then also our community engagement. We really do engage our community, and when I spoke about donations, we receive about $400,000 worth of donations every year, and that really maximizes our ability to respond. That stretches our resources, it serves the community better, and it really just saves lives, and so we really wanted to share that with you. Next slide. This slide just highlights our outcomes and indicators, what we care about. We care about no-kill sheltering. We care about public awareness. We want to make sure that if we're doing something, we want the public to know about it. So if you have ways for us to share that communication, please let us know. We want to make sure that the public is aware of all of our programs, our humane education, us going into schools and teaching children, our public trainings that are free, everything that we offer. We want to make sure the community is aware of it, that we offer high-quality services and have economies of scale, that the community is getting good service universally, and that we can serve more people so that we get that economies of scale, and that our employees are safe and well taken care of. Next slide, please. Just some interesting facts. I'll rush through this. We fed the animals at the shelter 21,000 pounds of food. Our fosters last year spent 93,000 hours caring for the pets. With the volunteer one below the 2,500 hours, that's extra 47 full-time employees with our volunteer hours, so that really amplifies what we're able to do. We spent over our 5,000 children and adults attended our humane education presentations, and we did 3,300 sterilizations. That's 9 a day, every day last year. Next slide, please. Some accomplishments from 2022. We won the National Association of Counties Hounds Around Town for the top volunteer program in the nation. This was against all other programs for volunteers. This competed against any volunteer program in any industry, and it won the top one in the nation. Utah has only won this award one other time, has won any category in the National Associations of Counties ever once before. So this was a huge award for the state of Utah. And then our cat rooms were remodeled. When Betty White passed away, we had received so many donations that we were able to remodel our entire cat rooms. And then we won Best of State again for the 14th time. Next slide, please. And this, Carrie will take over from here.
So this is going to be going over statistics for last year. So this slide shows you our overall intakes and outcomes for all of the jurisdictions that we serve. If you're looking at the totals, these do include adjusted totals. And what that means is it adjusts out any stats that we don't really have a control over we don't want to contribute to the no-kill, so such as deceased on arrivals, owner-requested euthanasias. We don't really have a control over that, so we don't want to have that count towards the no-kill. So that's what the adjusted totals means. So we brought in just over 6,200 animals, And you can see through the various methods of adoptions, sending them to rescues, redeeming to owners, our outcome totals was just over 6,100. And you can go to the next slide. Those numbers did contribute to our 93% live release rate, meaning 93% of animals left our shelter in a positive outcome. And that features 959 animals that were sent to rescue organizations and 988 that were sent into foster homes to keep them out of the shelter environment. You can go to the next one. Intake, so the rest of these statistics are specific to Salt Lake City. Intake for Salt Lake City, we brought in just over 3,100 animals. You can see that it's broken down. As Talia mentioned, we are one of the only ones that can take on a whole variety of animals, and you can see how they're broken down. We get in just about everything. So most commonly, cats, dogs, kittens, and puppies, but you never know what we're going to encounter. We actually just recently, it was in Holiday City, had a crab that was... We're all wondering. Yes, we had a crab that was running at large in a parking lot of a school. So
Literally running at large.
it was a blue crab, so you never know what we're going to get. So, but we are equipped to handle those situations. And if you want to go to the next slide. And our intakes, we break them down also by the method that they came into our shelter. Most commonly, ACO impounds, meaning our field officers go out and pick up the animal. Our second most common is strays that are brought in over the counter into the shelter. But you see, we do get them in a whole variety of methods. And that also totals, obviously, a little over 3,100. You can go to the next one. So these are our field statistics. These are calls for service that we received from the public. You can see our most common calls are animal at large and animal impound. But in 2022, we did over 6,700 calls for service from the public that our field responded to. And you can go to the next one. If we break down those calls by priority, our priorities go from 1 to 5. So 1 being the most high risk that poses the most risk to safety and condition of the public as well as the animals. So these are in progress attacks, bites, injured animals. Those are top of our list on priority. We will respond to those and before any other types of calls. Priority 2, less of high risk. So you can see as they go down to 5, it becomes a lower and lower risk. 2s and 3s, those tend to be more animal impound, animal at large. However, it doesn't depend on the circumstance of the call. Many of our calls can vary between different priorities. For example, animal at large, if it's a large dog or a pack of dogs in a very busy intersection, possibly posing a traffic threat, that's going to be a high priority. If it's a little poodle that's bebopping down a sidewalk in a quiet neighborhood, that's a lower priority. So they can vary depending on what the circumstance of the call. 4s and 5s, those tend to be ones that are more anytime during the day when we get a chance to, we will try to address those. Those are follow-ups on cases, perhaps investigations that there's nothing active going on, we're just following up. Park patrols, TNR, those types of calls that can wait a little longer, but we will still address once we have a chance to. If you go to the next slide. Citations and notice of violations. So we do issue 2 different types of violations. Notice of violations, those are more civil tickets, kind of like fix-it tickets or warnings that we will use as educational for the public. We can add stipulation dates, so we're working with them. We don't want to just hit them with fines right off the bat. We try to educate the public, but we will utilize these as an educational tool. Again, it does depend on the circumstance of the situation. If they are repeat offenders, it does go up in fines or violations. We have basically 4 steps of notice of violations. First one is more like a warning, all the way up to the 4th, where it's like, okay, we're serious about this. We may not do a stipulation. If the situation does warrant it, we will just move to a citation instead, where it's a criminal citation where they go to court. But you can see we did issue more notice of violations than citations, but again, we do try to educate the public rather than just hitting with fines. But our most common violations being no license, no rabies. Usually those go in conjunction with each other, as well as running at large. If you go to the next slide. So these are statistics given by the USDA for the Urban Wildlife Program for, excuse me, raccoons and skunks. The citizens that have reached out to them in Salt Lake City for assistance, the personal consultation where they come out and assess the situation, try to educate homeowners or neighborhoods. They came out about 10 times. Written and phone consult where they're answering questions using that method, 115. Actual trapping and removal of skunks and raccoons. You can see 152 raccoons and 156 skunks. If you go to the next slide. We do want to highlight some of our programs in the shelter, as well as some of our more of our achievements in our field department, which spans not only officers but also licensing, permitting, as well as enforcement at our front counter. We have great staffing, very expertise and skilled employees there. So we wanted to highlight a few of them last year for going above and beyond on their responsibilities and their quality of service that they've provided to the public. So we have Officer Kathleen Kao, Sergeant Jennifer Nielsen, Officer Don Belknap, and Officer Jerry Cantor. If you go to the next slide. We did achieve a few goals towards some of our regional projects. And Talia, if you can help me explain some of these goals that we have.
Sure. Bless you. So this is actually a county-wide project. So we are trying to create an animal care campus. This would be funded by transformational funding, but the idea is that we would create an animal care campus. So right now we are pursuing a study to decide where this would be and what it would have in it. But ideally, we want to have a location that would house animals countywide and have a dog park and potentially have somewhere that could have a place where people could get married, and a place where you could have like a library where you could talk to your pets, and a place where kids could climb on like a large cat condo, and really a community place where people would want to travel to Utah to come visit this pet destination. So right now we are in the works of conducting a study for this potential transformational project. So that is in the works, and we will keep you guys apprised of the movement on that study. So it looks like you have a question on
I was
this.
just going to ask you to go a little tiny bit faster through the
Oh, yeah.
rest of the slides,
We're
but-
almost done.
Yep, I will.
Almost done.
Thank you.
If you want to go to the next slide, I will run through this. This is also something that's funded through transformational funding. We have a mobile unit, so we will be working with you guys to find the community and the neighborhoods that need this the most. Pull up into the neighborhood right there, spay neuter right on the corner of the street. So let us know what streets need it the most, and we should have that up and running within the next few months. So we'll keep you guys posted on that. Move to the next slide.
So you're going to be able to do the surgery in the...
Right on the corner of the street. So we'll just pull up to the corner of the street, and then people can
Ice
line
cream
up.
man.
We'll get their animals. It will all be free. It's funded through transformational funding, so it's all paid for already. It is we're going to spay neuter as many animals as we can countywide through this. We're really behind on spay neuter, we know, because of COVID. So the goal is really just to hit as many communities that need it. So if we need the city's help to let us know who needs it and where we want to target. So yeah, if you guys will let us know who needs it and where, we will drive this giant bus that has been repurposed from the health department. We're going to drive up right to the community. They'll line up, give us their pets. 5 hours later, we'll give them back, and they'll be sterilized, microchipped, and ready to go. So, yep, all free. So, next, pet food pantry, go ahead.
And then just to highlight a few more of our programs that have really been popular with our community. The Pet Food Pantry, so this is funded through grants, donations. We receive a whole bunch of donated items, donated food, supplies, and we realize, especially during COVID, a lot of the community does sometimes struggle to feed their pets. We don't want that to be an issue, so every month we do host a Pet Food Pantry where it is free to the public. They drive up, let us know what they have, and we will load up their car, and that way they can not have to worry about feeding their furry pets. If you want to go to the next one. Also, free microchipping. This is funded through the county. Countywide, any resident can receive a free microchip for their pets. These have been vital in getting these animals back home. In case they lose their collar, we can always scan and find those owners. So if anyone is wanting to get their pets microchipped, let us know. If you live within the county, you can receive one for free. Move to the next one. Licensing, we're always trying to increase our licensing compliance. This year, we are featuring a new tag that features a QR code through pawfinder.com. The owners, if they want to register that QR code with Pawfinder, anyone who finds their pet, it will still have the license information on one side, but the other side, they can scan the QR code, get the owner information, potentially get that animal right back home rather than going to the shelter. So it's another method that we want to get those animals right back home rather than walking in our doors. You can go to the next one. And then just to highlight, as Talia mentioned, we do have some free training workshops. We have them every month. There's a whole variety of topics, anywhere from separation anxiety to dog aggression to building better behaviors, responsible pet ownership, whole variety of topics. They are taught by certified trainers that are local in the area that have partnered with us, free to the public. These are some upcoming ones that we have coming up here soon. If you go to our Facebook and our event page, you can see a whole list of the ones coming up. People can sign up right there.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Any questions?
Council members? Councilmember Fowler, then Wharton? Or
However, I didn't know.
Fowler, then Wharton, and then Pui.
I just want to say thank you for all of the work you do. And maybe my dog likes to take himself on walks, and I may have had to bail him out of doggy jail once or twice. So thank you for that. Being very kind. Everyone there is incredibly kind. And I think he actually just likes a little field trip there. So
We are a fun group.
yes. So I also feel like I should just count as one of the contributors because my fee does keep going up every time he gets out of doggy jail. But the other thing is, I truly am grateful for y'all, but we each do newsletters. And with some of the events coming up, I particularly, we're all, I think, animal lovers in this group. So I don't want to speak for my co-council members, but I think I can in that if you get emailed, we can figure out, can get some information to Sylvia, and then I would love to put some of like the events coming up, the contribution stuff. I think it is incredible that Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County is like one of the only no-kill shelters in ever. And I mean, that's huge and a huge accomplishment. So I think that you're absolutely right, and we should be promoting that, and I could dedicate a whole newsletter to it and put Nabby and Doggy Jail on the front of it. And so if you will get all of that information to Sylvia, we can definitely work around promoting that.
Absolutely. And we do want to invite, if any of you would like to come down to the shelter and tour it in person, you could definitely cuddle with some of the pets. More than welcome to.
All
You
of
may
us
leave
would
with
come
some.
home with like 82
I know.
animals.
We are also looking for foster homes. We are in kitten season. If you want some bottle baby kittens, it's a good way to sucker it into your home. So by all means, let us know. But yes, if you would like a tour, let me know, and we would love to have you down and show you everything that we do.
Councilmember Wharton, I'm going to go to Councilmember Dugan. I guess he has to leave in a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead,
Thank you,
Councilmember Dugan.
Mr. Chair. And thanks, and I appreciate all the support and help you guys give us across the board. Two issues, two different topics, but the first one is just the unleashed dogs, and it must be called running at large. We have a trouble in a lot of our parks about the conflicts there, and we'd really love your support, maybe some ideas on how we can better educate the public and also understand that issue. So that we can have the safety of people who don't have dogs out on leashes in some of these smaller parks. So I'd like to maybe have another conversation, separate issue on this topic to help us out in a lot of our parks.
Yeah.
And the second issue is I've been hearing lately through the neighborhoods on the eastern fox squirrel. It's become a nuisance, and I think it's doing some damages to some properties and wires and other things. And maybe get also your take on how we can control that smaller squirrel that is now kind of being evasive throughout the area. So again, we have a lot of newsletters, and if we could help the neighbors try to control that population increase of the little small eastern fox squirrel. So appreciate that again. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Councilmember Wharton.
Is there one of the questions that our staff had identified, and I appreciate you doing the list of the services that you provide, because I didn't even know that you could do an after-hours emergency call. So are there services that you offer that you feel are underutilized because of maybe lack of awareness?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think there are a lot of services that do you guys want to go into those a little bit more? But really, microchips are probably one of the key services that are underutilized. If every animal had a microchip, there wouldn't be animals at the shelter. That's really a key piece to it, because every animal would get home. It's the same with licenses. If every animal was licensed and microchipped, really, when we find an animal that doesn't have a microchip and a license, it's nameless. We don't know who owns it, and it goes to the shelter. And that is the key piece. If we know who it belongs to, we don't ever take it to the shelter. It goes home. And that is our goal is to not house a single animal at the shelter, because that is a waste. And that is expensive. The minute it goes to the shelter, it costs a lot more money. If we can get it home, it saves money. It gets that animal back home, which is what those people want. It's what the animal wants that. So it's that is the key piece, is getting those. That's just one element. There are a lot. The public trainings is another great example. We have animals that have really bad behaviors that are simple to fix, simple fixes, but people continually have the same behavior over and over again, and a public training that we offer could fix it, and they're free. And so a great example. Yeah, so yes, the answer is yes.
If you have just a little write-up of the top 3 or 4, I would like to put that in my newsletter too and send that out to people. And my second question is, what are transformational fees?
Funds, yes.
Funds.
Oh, yeah. So the county received, and I'm assuming the city did as well, but the county received money from COVID for relief.
Yeah.
And so we're utilizing money that was from COVID for results of COVID. So a result of COVID was animals weren't able to be sterilized. And so because of that, we've created this mobile unit to get animals sterilized. So that's, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilmember Puy, and
Yeah, thank you. I used to be on the county council as a staff when there were discussions of the no-kill. And Arlen Bradshaw, Councilmember Arlen Bradshaw is a very good friend of mine and a mentor to me, and his leadership on this issue from both his day job and the council job is incredible, and not only here in Utah but nationally. And it is incredible to see that this has been 10 years ago, which is kind of shocking to me that it's been 10 years that I was in the county council. I feel old now. I do have some questions on no questions, but maybe a suggestion. We all have newsletters. We all said it. If you guys add us to your newsletter, so we can actually have our staff incorporate whatever you guys are doing. But some of those might be videos, maybe if you guys have like some of those behavioral trainings that we can share in our own social medias too. Social media is a powerful tool, as you all know. And in my part of town, on the west side of Salt Lake, I'm seeing on Nextdoor and in Ring, probably dozens of people acknowledging at-large dogs or cats, and they're in right now every day almost, and people don't know what to do. So if there is a way of, always be plugging in the information into this, so people start spreading it themselves. So some videos and some information what to do when you see an animal. I think that would be very useful, and maybe the information about microchipping and all that. And actually, I was just texting Arlen, and maybe I need to re-up my license too for my dog. So I see this all reminded me about all these things. So thank you. But if you guys work on some of those videos, maybe I already have them. I would love to share them into Ring and all of these places where people are commenting about at-large dogs.
One way to also help with the strays in the area, our humane education program, it's one of our most popular, but one of the topics that she can cover with the schools and get the children to get involved as well is what to do when you encounter a stray, also bite prevention if there are at-large animals in your area. It is a great tool to teach a whole multitude of children, especially at once. They can then pass along the information to the families as well. So we can definitely get information on our education programs as well.
That would be fantastic. One more thing, quickly.
Okay, quickly, last comment.
I've been to places where you guys bring pets to adopt into coffee shops or whatnot. How do we get some of that happening in some of our buildings? Because I don't trust people who don't have pets, so more people need to have pets. So maybe you guys bring them here.
Yep. Just we'd bring them anytime you want us to. We're happy to. Just let us know when you want them, and we'll be here. So yeah,
we're all gonna end up with 5 cats and 10 dogs.
We'd bring them anytime you want them, and we'll get in touch. We'll coordinate with Sylvia about the social media because we do post. I mean, we have a huge following on social media, and we'd love to connect with you guys however you want. Whatever you want, we will connect with you guys however you want that to be. So we'd love that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to cut the conversation off there. We're 23 minutes behind. I know we all love animals.
Sorry.
And you win for the cutest slides.
Thank you.
But we're going to move on to agenda item number 4. Thank you so much for being here. This item number 4 is an ordinance amending the Salt Lake City Sister Cities Board. At the table, we have, again, Sylvia Richards from Council Policy Analyst staff, Lorena Rifo-Jensen, Director of our Economic Development Department, and Katie Matheson from the Department of Economic Development as well. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, and happy Valentine's Day to all of you. It is wonderful to see you. I also want to tell Katie, thank you for staying with us for a year. It's her anniversary with our department. I think that's critical to celebrate that. Sister cities. I think we all know that sister cities are really, they're a partnership, relationship between two communities. It could be perceived also as an agreement, but I think more importantly, it's a connection that brings understanding between communities. And that's what we're here to do today, is to ensure that it's set up correctly. I also want to thank the Attorney's Office for your help in making us do this right, because you have been a critical component, our attorney, Sarah Montoya, and also the people that have served on the board previously. But I think more importantly, we have somebody who has an incredible passion for this program. So with that, I think you can take it away.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. I do not have cute animals on my slides, so apologies for that in advance. And no crabs at large either, which is also disappointing. We can go ahead to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the history of Sister Cities. I think it's remarkable that this program has been in existence in Salt Lake City for 65 years this year. Our first relationship was established with Matsumoto Japan in 1958, which was just 2 years after President Eisenhower created the program. If you don't know about the history and the story about how our relationship with Japan started, I definitely encourage you read up on it, or I'm happy to speak with you on it. It is a beautiful story, especially given the context in which it happened. It was post-World War II and in the middle of the Cold War. Following our relationship with Matsumoto Japan, our relationships expanded to 5 other cities. And of course, we do have 3 emeritus sister cities, which basically means the sister cities haven't been active. The relationship hasn't been active for a long time. We can go to the next slide. So now I'm going to get into the purpose of this presentation, which is just our proposed ordinance updates, and this is specifically for the makeup of the Sister Cities Board. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the why. The ordinance has not been updated for about 20 years, so it's been a while. Our program could benefit from an enhanced responsiveness to new Sister Cities requests, but also better maintenance of current relationships. Having a robust and responsive program shows the world that we are internationally minded. We've also seen an opportunity to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion on the board, become really efficient stewards of taxpayer dollars, and the adjustments that we've made brings this board better in line with other boards and commissions within the city. And in general, this will be the first step in helping us really rejuvenate the program. Next slide. I'm sorry, you can go ahead to the next slide too. I got ahead of myself. So real quick, I want you to know that the adjustments that the administration is recommending come from background research and conversations with the entities that you see listed here. Some of them were quick conversations, and some of them, for example, San Antonio, Texas. I had the privilege 2 weeks ago of going to San Antonio, Texas. They have an award-winning Sister Cities program, and they were gracious enough to let me follow them around like a puppy for like 2 days and watch how they manage their program, and it was a remarkable experience. Next. So this is just going to help you think through the changes that we're making. So I've put them into 3 general categories. One is geographic boundaries, one is the board of directors itself, and then the one is how we manage new Sister Cities requests. So the next slide, which looks scary, but we'll get through it. Next slide. Great. So I'm just going to read through the left and the center, and you can read through the Y, the column on the right. I'm happy to address any questions that you may have on this at any given time, but I didn't want to just read a slide at you. So the changes are as follows. First, currently there are no limits on the number of board members, and currently there are only voting board members. We propose that we create a board that has 7 to 9 voting members and allows up to 6 non-voting members. Going down from that, currently there are no term limits. We recommend term limits. There would be a limit of 2 4-year terms, and those would be consecutive. Once a board member reaches their term limit, a voting board member reaches their term limit, they can cycle and become a non-voting board member, and they can serve as a non-voting board member in perpetuity. And then finally, currently board members must be 18 or older. We recommend allowing up to 2 youth members to serve on the non-voting board. Regarding geographic boundaries, there is currently no requirement for board members to live in Salt Lake City boundaries. We recommend board members represent each of the 7 Salt Lake City districts with an option for 2 at-large positions, and of course, those would all be within Salt Lake City. Something to note here, there is an option if council and mayor decide that there is a good reason to appoint a board member who does not live within Salt Lake City boundaries, they can do so. And currently, meetings are not required to be within Salt Lake City boundaries. At the recommendation of the city attorney, we recommend meetings now occur within Salt Lake City and happen at public locations, so a building such as this, a library, or a park. And finally, new Sister Cities requests. In the past, the program has functioned largely as a county-wide program, and in fact, even past the county, it could be adjacent counties. Given the where Salt Lake City is now and where Salt Lake City is going, we recommend that requests be made by a person or an organization that is headquartered within Salt Lake City. Next. So then the question is inevitably, assuming these ordinance changes are approved, what are the next steps? So the next steps would be we bring on a board, we train them, and then, of course, we have formed a task force. At the task force is members of Department of Economic Development, members of council staff, and members of the mayor's staff. And the purpose of this task force is to plan to welcome the delegation from Matsumoto, Japan that is coming this summer. And they have indicated that they want to march in the Days of 47 parade. So we're going to have a lot of fun when they come. And the next slide. That is it. So I'm open for questions.
I have a quick question. Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I have a quick question. On the term limits, I know that we have, with something like this where we're interacting with cities across the world, and those relationships, we may not interact with them often, and maybe once a year, a couple times a year. I'm wondering if the term limits limit somebody from building like a deep relationship with other people in that city, and if perhaps there was a way for them to cycle off of the voting board and then maybe back on again if there aren't enough people. It seems like to build a relationship with a specific city, with a specific language, it might filter out the number of Salt Lake City residents that might be a good fit for this, and I wouldn't want to have a really excellent person building a relationship and then because of term limits, they must stop.
Yeah.
Is there some reasoning behind that?
Yes, so you bring up kind of the heart of the challenge of this ordinance change, which is diplomatic relationships are built on relationships of people. We know, for example, Jeanette Misaka, who has managed our beautiful relationship with Japan for years and years, possibly longer than I've been alive. She's a perfect example of the importance of these relationships. And so at hand, we had a challenge where on one hand, we want to make sure that those relationships with these cities flourish and continue to grow and continue to be maintained. And on the other hand, we have a challenge where we need to be bringing on new people onto the board. And so we felt that the balance of having the 2 consecutive 4-year terms and then allowing those members to become non-voting members in perpetuity, that doesn't limit their ability to be the liaison. And in fact, informally and not mentioned here, but I have mentioned it to some of the board members, the hope is that the board would formally create a mentorship program where someone like Jeanette or someone who has managed these relationships for a long time, once they cycle onto the non-voting board, they're still on the board. They're just not a voting member, and they can also bring someone in to teach them to introduce them to people, to teach them about the relationship, and to have that institutional knowledge shared in perpetuity, really.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Yes, Councilmember Pui.
I have a few questions. What are there budget implications on staffing needs to manage this board? Since when we were working on last year on this connection with the Mayor Chernivsky, we, talking with the administration, we realized that the Sister Cities program was dead, and I'm very happy about this, and it's a wonderful thing. But I just want to know if you guys are going to need more staffing, or you're going to need more managerial things to make it happen. Things.
So I really appreciate the question, and we've actually have discussed this, and I appreciate the administration also asking us this question. One of the things we want to do is to ensure that as we move forward, we bring back success to you, and we don't want to overpromise things we cannot deliver. Therefore, the answer would be yes, we would like to come in and ask you. However, we want to make sure that we're setting up the program correctly, and we're not asking for a budget before we're prepared to execute on that budget.
Okay, thank you. That helps a lot. And also, 2 parts to this question. One, is there a plan?
Make them quick.
A plan to rekindle, former relations with other cities? And the second part of that question. I had on the new changes on the ordinance. The last one was that the request must be done by someone, an organization, or a person that lives within the city. And I'm not sure. I don't understand the purpose of that. I mean, we have a very diverse state, and we are the most famous city in the state. And I can see organizations that don't have a house here within our city, although we welcome them to move in, to ask for a sisterhood. So I don't know if you can explain me that one, but also if the plan to rekindle some of those former relationships.
Do you want to take one? Okay.
So in regards to your first question, it was recommended to me in my conversations with entities that do this and other cities that have done this as well. The best way forward is to start one city at a time, especially given the resources that we currently have. And so the relationship with Matsumoto, we're celebrating this year, and so that seemed like the natural first fit. As a side note, they were our first sister city, and we were their first sister city, so it's a very special relationship.
That's so
I know,
cool.
it's so sweet. But what that means is we want to do this right, and so one at a time we think is best. Did you want me to take the second one, or did you want to?
Go ahead, and then I'll add my comment.
Regarding the boundaries for who can recommend, so it is either an individual who lives within Salt Lake City or an organization that is headquartered within Salt Lake City. So for example, any of our partners that Department of Economic Development works with, if they have a recommendation for a sister city and it is headquartered in Salt Lake City, we could accept that relationship. So it's not necessarily, it is open to either one of those. As regards to why, I understand that cities like Sandy have sister cities, and I think West Valley? Yeah. West Valley also has sister cities. So other cities around the county and in other counties do have sister cities programs. And because of this, and because when Sister Cities was first established, Salt Lake City was like the metro area, and now, I mean, it still is, it's the capital city, but as the whole county and the whole state really develops and expands, it seemed like the best way forward was to limit it in that way, and we have no shortage of requests for sister cities for sure.
I was just going to say also, I think it's critical that when we have all these community entities, a lot of them are driven by refugee communities, different social groups that come together to celebrate their culture here and ensure that that's shared with their local new community, that we do it well. So we want to make sure that we are executing and ensuring that we're doing things well rather than just opening it up and not doing anything right.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you. Hi. I wanted to follow up on the need, the financial need. So in my experience with sister cities, for example, in Europe, there's some in Argentina and Europe that I've been able to participate in events, and so for example, some cities have like an arts, but specifically dancing. So they would sponsor a lot of sister cities to come to their city and have a festival. So the way they did it, they would actually host. They don't pay for the flight, but they do pay for their stay and for their food in the length of the time that the cities will be visiting, in exchange of their dancing, the showcasing of their dancing, and to the community in parks and in other stadiums, whatever that is. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like maybe we need to look at how other sister cities in the world work and how they spend their monies and what their purpose is, so that we have a purpose as well, not just the sisterhood. But in that same vein, we had a really successful story, I hear, so thank you. Trujillo, Peru, which is one of our sister cities, was here a couple of months ago, and our sister cities, they were having an issue with Peru and all the things that we've heard in the news, but they had a question for us and a request if it was possible, and they said, our town doesn't have that much, and sometimes and our firefighters are usually volunteers and they don't get paid. So if your fire department has, it's going to get rid of suits because they're worn out, or you guys are changing the whole uniforms, is it possible that we get them? And because they said, because for you maybe they're old and you're not going to use it anymore, but for us it would mean the world because we don't have any of that. And so thank you, because I heard you talk to the fire department, and I think that has happened, or it's on its way of happening.
If I may,
Yeah.
it's, they were asking for training. and
Training,
so,
but
yeah.
also the uniforms.
Yeah, so Chief Lieb is, we've been working with Chief Lieb on the training.
That's great.
So things like that, I think it would be so great if we can, with our sister cities, things that are, we can start there where they're not super expensive, like things that we can help with. Okay. Then the third one, is there any opportunity or connection or reason why maybe we do need to unite the sister cities group with the local consulates here? I don't know if you thought about that, but I don't know why I thought that maybe there's a connection. We have a lot of consulates in Salt Lake City that can potentially participating, and maybe they have cities that they want to.
That's an excellent point, Councilmember Valdemoros. In fact, one of our advisors is an honorary consul himself, Franz Kolb, with the governor's office, has been working side by side with Katie, guiding her through this, ensuring that she's looking at other programs that have been successful. I have loved how passionate many of you are about this program, if not all of you. And I think I love the ideas, and we want to do more. I also want to make sure that we're doing this well and that we're doing it right. And I think that has been our desire to make the changes, working side by side with our attorney's office, and ensuring that when we come to you with a request, a financial request, we start with a strong beginning, but also we bring back success, and we don't ask for more than what we need.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we're all, I won't speak for everyone. I'm excited about this. I think this is a good opportunity, and especially as we look to hosting the Olympics again, I think having international relationships is a great idea. So thank you.
Thank you kindly.
Let's move on to item number 5, which is an informational overview of Salt Lake City housing-related programs and initiatives. We have at the table Blake Thomas and Tammy Hunsaker, Director and Deputy Director of Community and Neighborhoods, and Danny Waltz, the RDA Director, as well as Rachel Otto and Lisa Schaefer available for questions. Good to see you again.
Oh. All right. Are we just jumping right in?
I think so. Go ahead.
Okay. There is a slide deck. Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to discuss the administration's interrelated housing initiatives and how the Department of Community and Neighborhoods, specifically the department's administrative team, the Planning Division, and the Housing Stability Division work lockstep with the Redevelopment Agency to work to protect tenants from displacement, to preserve existing affordable housing, and to produce more affordable units. So next slide, please. We'll dive right in. Okay. This chart demonstrates how the city's plans and policies are established and transformed into funding initiatives and projects on a broad scale and not just related to housing. So if we work our way through this slide from left to right, it will take a zoomed out macro lens on the left to a more granular micro lens on the right. As you know, the state requires a general plan of which a housing element is a component. So on the left, under Citywide Vision, Plan Salt Lake is the vision plan that all other plans are intended to achieve, while the citywide elements column, the next over to the right, is intended to provide citywide policies related to various topics, and then the next column, community land use elements, establishes the land use policies. That also includes small area plans, corridor plans, and station area plans. So as an example of citywide elements, that second column is the housing plan, and that is Housing SLC, Growing SLC now, soon to be Housing SLC, and actually the next agenda item, which serves as the city's 5-year moderate income housing plan. On the next column, an example of community land use elements would be the recently adopted ballpark station area plan, which calls for zoning code updates that allow for greater housing density in the neighborhood. All these plans go through public processes and culminate with city council approval. So as such, the city's land use policy, the next column over, or the fourth column to the right, is the regulatory tool that allows the development of housing to carry out the vision established in the general plan. Additionally, there are implementation plans and programs, or those last two columns on the right, all of which must align with the city's general plan, such as RDA project area plans and the associated use of the affordable housing set-aside funds. And example in CAN would be the HUD 5-year consolidated plan and the expenditure of community development block grant funds, or CDBG. Next slide, please. So to go from there, we want to further drill in, and we hope that this housing roles and responsibilities matrix quickly conveys the ways in which the city delivers on the policy, regulations, and implementation programs described on that previous slide. So as an example, if you look at the top left corner under policy and plans and CAN admin, or the administrative team in the department, our team is responsible for delivering Thriving in Place, the anti-displacement study, which has been guided by community input, as well as a city steering committee, which has representatives from across all city departments and the RDA. The other plan within that quadrant is Housing SLC, and that also has an internal policy team, which includes the RDA, as well as a citywide steering committee. Sticking with that column and working our way down, you'll see that the Housing Stability Division delivers federally required plans through Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and the Planning Division is responsible for zoning code, land use ordinances, and master plans. The next column, regulatory and financial, you can see that the Moderate Income Housing Plan, or Housing SLC, is also included here because of the state mandated reporting requirements, such as the implementation plan. The Housing Stability Team administers federal funding for housing, such as Community Development Block Grant, Home Emergency Solutions Grant, Housing for Persons with AIDS, as well as funding from the Treasury, Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. I'm trying to be very sensitive to acronyms since there are so many, especially with federal funding. And we also have a little key at the
Thank you for doing that.
bottom of that document. That team also assists with other sources of funding, such as funds that come from the state of Utah or programs that are delivered through Funding Our Future. Staying in the regulatory and financial column, the Planning Division oversees development agreements, zoning code review, and land use application. Next is direct delivery programs. Housing Stability has oversight of the programs we discussed last week that you might be familiar with, which include the Home Repair Program, the Home Buyer Program, the Community Land Trust, homelessness projects and programs. In addition, which we didn't discuss last week, being impact fee waivers and the Fix the Bricks program. Lastly, in the property development column, the Department of Community and Neighborhoods oversees the development of select surplus properties, an example of this being the tiny home village at 1850 West Indiana Avenue. The last row is dedicated to the RDA, and I wanted to give Danny a moment to speak to any of those programs if you'd like, and then we have 2 more slides after that that Tammy will go into.
Sure, thank you, Blake. Excuse me, I'll be quick. For the RDA row, for us it really starts with the project area plans. As you know, when we look to target an area, that's where we go and first look at what our alignment will be with the city's master plans. We do whatever level of public process and engagement is required by state statute, and then you as an RDA board obviously is involved in both the initial startup of those project area examinations and looking at where we should go, and then those ultimately involve the other taxing entities incorporating their priorities in negotiating the terms of those specific project areas. From there, you as a board have over time approved the specific policies related to housing. Most specifically is our housing funds allocation policy, which is what establishes both the 4 separate funds that separate and guide the various requirements and regulations for implementing those funds, as well as the goals and objectives of those specific funds, either related to state statute or those that you have placed on them with regard to funding our future or the West Side Community Initiative. Within that housing funds allocation policy is what is the housing funding priorities, or that annual strategy that we bring to you as a board and you approve, and then that gets incorporated in what is our annual budget. Going to the next column, the regulatory and financial. High level, the biggest things here is anything regarding tax increment financing is regulated by state statute. The Inland Port Housing Funds also established and sent to the RDA through statute, and then the city's funding our future allocation of the agency that is guided by that model, model and goals. Our direct delivery programs related to housing specifically are our housing development loan program, within which is how we put funds out through our notice of funding availability and our loan program. And then we also have the ability to do tax increment reimbursement agreements as part of that program. And then finally, under property development, acquisition and disposition and development of property by the agency is also one of our tools for how we play into the housing roles and what our responsibilities can be and the tools that we bring to the table.
Thanks, Danny. Next slide, please. We want to provide some clarification on how Housing SLC and TIP work together. Once adopted, Housing SLC will be the city's next 5-year housing plan, fulfilling the state's moderate income housing requirements, including a housing implementation plan. While fulfilling the state requirements, it will actually go above and beyond these basic requirements and will provide additional community outreach, data analysis, and policy direction. For example, the state doesn't require a municipality to collect data or implement policy solutions for anti-displacement measures, and we're hoping that Housing SLC will do exactly that. The scope of Thriving in Place is more narrow and is very anti-displacement focused. However, because of the timing of both of the plans and the coordination that needed to take place, we did have a lot of crossover between public engagement and data analysis efforts for the 2 plans. Also, this overlap between the 2 plans, we really want to centralize all of the broad housing plans for the city under Housing SLC, and as such want to incorporate the housing-related policy recommendations identified in TIP into Housing SLC and actually provide TIP as an addendum to the Housing SLC plan. And the reason the administration is proposing that is Housing SLC is supposed to fill that state requirement as the city's housing element, and we do want to provide a centralized resource for all of those policies to be located. Of course, it is up to the council's discretion on exactly how those plans are adopted. And even though TIP is proposed to be an addendum to Housing SLC, I imagine it could also be adopted separately from Housing SLC. Both plans have a cross-departmental working group, including Housing Stability, CAN, Planning, and the RDA, and other divisions and departments, as Blake discussed. So that's kind of how the 2 plans work together. Hopefully that added some clarification. Let's go to the next slide. This slide is intended to provide an overview of recent initiatives that have either come before the council recently or will come before the council over the next several weeks. As you can see from the variety of these items, the city's approach to the affordability crisis is multifaceted. Beginning with plans, as Blake discussed, the city's general plan serves as the foundation for all policies and land use decisions. we are working to ensure that our plans serve as a blueprint for the future that we want to aspire to, setting policy goals and objectives to support housing production, affordability, equitable distribution, and mitigation of displacement. So the current plan updates, as I just spoke about, are Housing SLC and Thriving in Place. If we look at some of the regulation initiatives that have come before you, we're working on various zoning and land use updates. Some of these policies are intended to allow more housing to be built by right without any city process required. For example, the recently adopted shared housing, parking, and RMF 30 ordinances are intended to do just this. The proposed affordable housing incentives ordinance is intended to encourage the production of affordable housing by offering various zoning incentives in return for the development of affordable units. So those are some of the approaches that we're taking through recommendations that are regulatory in nature. Looking at financial administration, we're also working on financial plans for deploying HUD resources to address the affordability crisis. In process is a $3.5 million allocation of Home American Rescue Plan funding that we're calling Home ARP. An allocation plan has recently been transmitted to the council for a public hearing and for consideration of adoption. Over the next several weeks, we will also be transmitting to you the HUD annual funding recommendation plan, including for CDBG, Home, ESG, and HOPWA. So you will be seeing that plan soon. And then we are also always transmitting various initiatives to fund programs and projects. Some of the recently funded items were like the RDA funded the NOFA. Recently, you awarded projects funding through that process, the Housing Development Loan Program through the RDA. We're also providing funding to residents through homeownership opportunities through housing stability, as Blake spoke about the homebuyer program. Through the homebuyer program, we're planning to bring to you a policy discussion to establish those formal policies that we talked about last week. So that is something that will be coming to you soon. Recent homelessness initiatives include the council's approval of the discounted land lease for the tiny home village and also the $6 million for extremely low-income housing units. So in terms of funding projects and programs directly, that's kind of how we're looking at it in the pot of to developers, to residents, and also for homelessness initiatives. Danny, is there anything you'd like to add on current projects or initiatives that will be coming?
No, I think you got it. The first one you'll see is the RDA board. Obviously, next month we'll get into the details of the RDA housing funding strategy, which will guide us as part of our approval for next year's budget.
So to end, we are just hoping that this presentation's adding some clarity. Hopefully it's not confusing you more, but we really just wanted to talk about how we're approaching the affordability crisis from a policy level through the general plan, through zoning code, and also through these funding plans and initiatives, and add some clarity on the roles and responsibilities across the city, and then also talk about some initiatives that will be coming before you in the upcoming weeks.
Thank you, Blake, Tammy, and Danny. Council members? Sounds like you did a really good job. It's very clear. No questions? I'll ask the one question that we've been asking a lot of times. The one thing that I see duplicated is development, both in CAN, admin, and RDA, in terms of that green property development column on the, third slide. I know that, is this a bandwidth issue? Can we talk about the reason why we have two different departments doing a similar function? I know that there's like the legal issues of some properties owned by the city's real estate division and some is owned by the RDA, like legally, but I think that's something we could get around. But what's the Why do we do it that way?
Yeah, I can take a shot at it. It is correct that I think historically it was RDA-owned property and city-owned property. RDA-owned properties managed by 17C, city-owned property by state statute and also City Code 2.58. However, there has been more crossover recently. The RDA has really been leading out on the ballpark properties that are owned by the city, and there could be more crossover depending on the mayor's and the council's priorities and policy recommendations for how those functions should work. I think one of the things that would need to be considered is RDA statute provides for the RDA to implement housing citywide. But if there are city-owned properties that aren't going to be used for affordable housing outside of a project area, that could be outside of the scope of the taxing entities and the project area plans that the RDA is charged to work on. But I will let Danny clarify and add anything to that.
There may need to be like a fund transfer to cover the staffing time
Potentially,
from
yes.
RDA staff in order to, so that they're not being paid by tax increment funding.
Is that it? Yes, that would be what we'd have to do, because it's not that RDA couldn't work on the development that is a city-owned property. What I'm hearing and what I think Darren was trying to clarify is that
the general fund would have to.
The general fund would have to pay for the staff time, not the taxing, not whatever
the TIF.
The taxing entities.
Yeah, I think
put
if you got
forward to
into
that
that,
administrative percentage.
yes, I think if you got into that level of nuance, you'd probably want to make sure that we're being clear of how much RDA staff time is going towards potentially city resources, and does there need to be either a transfer of funds or adjustment. But I think that gets into how much work that is, and as Tammy said, what those projects or properties or programs may really look like.
I think for my purposes, I think I can see why having something in multiple departments would be problematic. I also see the property development projects and RFPs as sort of discrete things. So in terms of bandwidth, if we have people that are experts at doing that in multiple departments, I'm not opposed to having that, but what I do want is to make sure that the public sees like one place to go for RFPs, one process to go through, and that our policies for how we're disposing of RDA-owned properties and city-owned properties are as overlapping and aligned as possible. And I know that's been our goal, but as it's kind of a discussion item for council members, because we've talked about this a lot, I can see benefits of both ways, but what I definitely want is for it to be, from the public's perspective, one thing, not, oh, I got to talk to this person for this thing and that person for that thing. And I'm not exactly sure how to make those goals happen in different departments.
And would that be general public or more developer community?
I guess more we're talking about the development column,
Yeah.
so I would say more the developer community. Adjacent to that, one of my goals has always been that it's more of the public can be involved in some of those processes, because we hopefully can have projects at a smaller scale and they're not just giant things. But that's a slight tangent, I guess. Those people would then move over into the development.
I think if I may,
category.
There's no clear-cut answer. I think everyone understands there's a lot of gray area and obviously a lot of potential for crossover. I think when it comes to trying to define this historically, it's usually fallen into three categories. One is either what is the scope? RDA tends to do more of projects and real estate development. CAN and housing stability tend to do more programs and people-based initiatives. I think the other is scale. I think when we're talking larger scale developments, one of the reasons we look at doing things like the ballpark initiative is that is a fairly large real estate project with a lot of different pieces that fall in line with a lot of what we do, whereas there is a scale of projects and development that CAN or housing stability falls within what is more of their line and priorities. And then I think the third one is really where the funding's coming from. If you look at where a lot of this funding is. Housing Stability and CAN deals almost entirely with anything we get from federal funds. RDA is driven more by 17C, and where that crossover is sometimes when we get funds and are trying to navigate where it makes sense. Either, great example, the $6 million in affordable housing that was just granted. On the surface, that may be an easy answer of saying that's development, that's going into real estate projects, but it really was more homelessness based and trying to accomplish that city goal and priority. So that's where you have a crossover of what is really the purpose of these funds and who is better equipped to deal with accomplishing that goal versus just trying to maintain a hard, fast line. So all of that gets factored into, I think, historically as things have kind of shifted and gone back and forth. But if you look at what CAN and Housing Stability does, I mean, there's no reason for the RDA to be involved in any federal funding because that's a totally different set of rules and regulation that they have a staff that are experts at that. Same to the point of if it's a larger scale development, we tend to have that experience. So
what I'm hoping for is that there's a person that has property and wants to do affordable housing. They're not sure whether RDA funding or federal funding is appropriate for, if they qualify for either or both or neither. And rather than them having to go through one process instead of staff to get meetings with Danny's team and another to get meetings with Blake and Tammy's team, how can we make sure that there's like a place that they say, hey, here's my project, here's what I want to do. Is there anything in the city that can help me accomplish my goals and the city's goals? And if so, who do I talk to next, rather than having to go in different directions and ask all these things. There's a specific project. I just went to an open house for the Alliance House, which is doing a deeply affordable housing project. And I had that same conversation with them. Like, I don't know which department you should talk to next. It clearly falls in our city goals. It's something that is a clear need, but like, we have to set up multiple meetings with different people to get the answers. Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to focus on something you said and push back a little bit, Danny, on some other things that I completely agree. And I think that this is what we've been talking about for so many years, is that the RDA is sort of the development. It's in your name, by the way. That area, and that Housing Stability is sort of the people and project side of things. And that's why the development in two different places doesn't make any sense to me. And it is something that I've been pushing back on a minute for us to actually really think about. And so, going back to a couple of other things, I do want to push back on the fact that, the scope and the scale, well, the scope is, I agree with, but the scale and the funding, well, let me start with the scale. The RDA has done projects that include a house. And you've done really big projects. So I think that it's strange for me to say, like, oh, if it's just, a project, the RDA couldn't handle it, because I think you could. And I think that it would streamline this process, where I completely agree that maybe the RDA is not the right place to have federal funding and oversight over federal funding and the projects that are given, right? And that is what I've been pushing about, is get development into the area where development belongs, so that it also looks at transparency, so that we, when we're looking at things, say we already know what our goals are. And if it is affordable housing, which it is, we know that RDA has put millions and millions of dollars into affordable housing and continues to do that. And we know that they can talk to the developers. We know that there's a relationship there. And we've also established a complete mission statement and guideline by which we're going to look at projects, whether that be one house or 725 units. And you can check the box. And we spent years, literally 18 months at least, going through that mission, that value, and it's something that now we bring up every year of what is the council's or the board's this year's priorities. And I think all of the development money should go there, because that is where we've already developed the plan. Then On the other side, in housing stability, I completely agree. That is where HUD money should be. That's where we should look at the programs that we're spending. And we have that accountability and that transparency through that side of it. But having that overlap is something that I am continuing to push to separate, because it just makes it easier, not just for the public, whether it be developing communities, whether it be organizations that know that they maybe they want to rebuild a piece of it and they qualify for HUD. They know they're not going to go to RDA for that, right? But we need to create that boundary. Plus, I think it's just easier for the people sitting right here, right? If we know that we've already worked on all of this about what our priorities are, we don't have to keep changing that and keep looking at it. We've spent that time doing that. And we know what this side of the hand is doing, right? Because we're looking at these programs and we know that that's where that funding is going. And we're not like, oh, we should tiptoe around all of this because we don't know what's going on. Because it's confusing generally, right? And so I think in general, it's just easier for the people that you want making these decisions. So I'm going to keep pushing on this.
I think there's and we're saying similar, but maybe slightly different things. I think there's also an element of people that have experience and resources can navigate the multiple different departments and potentially get funding from multiple departments, and including outside of the city, of course. Whereas for a smaller organization, for a smaller project that may actually need multiple sources of funding, I think it's hard for them to just know where to go. So maybe two separate goals that are very related. Blake?
Chair Mana, I'd love to respond to your earlier comment. I think it's a good point, and what it flagged in my mind is maybe communications and marketing opportunities where you have these funding programs. They're not perfectly aligned timing-wise, whether that be the NOFA or HUD regulations or funding our future annual budget, and it seems like there's a real opportunity for kind of the foundational work that happened here in this presentation with the macro view of how we go from a vision to implementation, and then the matrix of kind of a more granular who does what. I think that would be a good opportunity for us to be able to put together kind of a one-page resource of what program, who the eligible audience is, what the timing or big eligibility pinch points are in each program. So,
and maybe it needs to be like one person too. Like we can, as we're out in the community and we find out about a project that that aligns with city goals, we can say, go talk to this person first, and then they'll figure out which of all of these different things.
Yeah, we'd be open to any liaison work. I mean, one thing I appreciate when I started, kind of directed by Mayor Mendenhall, is trying to break down silos and have a process of continual improvement and overlap. And we hope we relayed that in the presentation of how, I sit on the RDA Finance Committee, and the RDA sits on the Thriving in Place City Steering Committee. And I think that there is a good partnership there and a really good opportunity to address some of those concerns.
All right. Well, thank
Mr.
you.
Chair,
Oh, go ahead.
if I could
Hannah.
add, it was a few years back. I can't remember if you were on the council yet or not, but there was legislative intent to centralize the funding for affordable housing developers to access, and that has been done. There's a few exceptions that we're cleaning up within housing stability, but that has been done. The Housing Trust Fund has been transferred to the RDA, and administration of all those old loans and the new loans that are being issued. So the question really is just the property development and the city's surplus property that is still being managed by the city. Okay. And one other change that was made about that same time when the Housing Trust Fund was being moved, the city has a real estate services team, and that team used to be housed in the housing division, but a few years back that was moved out into CAN administration. So Blake and I work closely with that team, and that team is charged with issuing special event permits, encroachment agreements, commercial leases of city property. So there is a lot of real estate function that is going on that I think needs to remain on the city side, but there is this gray area with the surplus property, and we're happy to do whatever makes sense. There are some properties actually that are located within the 9-line project area that are ready for development that we've talked internally, like would that make sense transferring those to the RDA because they're right in the middle of a new project area that the RDA is trying to get off the ground. So we're happy to, work with both branches to do whatever makes
Thanks
sense.
for bringing that up, Tammy. That does help remind me of a couple slight nuances, but important conversation. I think we'll continue to discuss that. Let's move on to item number 6, which is almost the same people at the table. We're going to switch
Thank you.
out Danny for Angela Price, and I think Allison Rowland is from council staff is going to give us a quick introduction.
Yeah, and Rudiger Mathis on our team will be presenting the slide
That?
deck. Rudiger Mathis, who reports to Angela, will be presenting.
Great. Hi, Rudiger.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I keep sneezing.
Bless
So, thank you. This is an informational update on the new 5-year housing plan, which is being called Housing SLC. The plan is designed to establish the bases for housing policy, program, and funding priorities for the next 5 years. In its transmittal, CAN has summarized the key findings from its work so far, including public engagement in attachment or Appendix 1 and a housing needs analysis in Appendix 2. I'm just going to talk briefly about the calendar and then turn it over to Rudy. First, the state has adopted a new date by which the city must submit its new plan, and this is June 30th. So some of you may remember in the past the date was sometime in the fall. I think it was November 30th, more or less. Now it's been moved earlier, and that also means that the previous, or rather the current housing plan, which was called Growing SLC, expires on June 30th as well. So there is a little bit of time pressure. CAN has an initial planning commission briefing on the full draft plan scheduled for next week, I believe. And once any revisions from the planning commission are completed and the administration sends a new transmittal to the council, there'll be a tentative schedule, rather the council staff can make a tentative schedule for a council briefing, public hearing, and potential adoption. Because it's mid-February now, of course, council staff is already going, the budget is coming, the budget is coming. And so we have mentioned to CAN that the full draft of the plan must be received by April 18th in order for our office to be able to get that on the agenda on May 2nd, which is really the last date during the budget season that other things can be briefed. So we're pre-worrying for you. And so unless there are questions, I'll turn it over to Rudy.
Thanks, Allison. Go ahead, Rudy.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. And with that, we are mindful of the timeline. So I wanted to, as Allison mentioned, I wanted to just provide an update on what we have done with Housing SLC to date, including the engagement, the existing conditions, and also talk through, can you go to the next slide, please? Talk through some state requirements and how, kind of touch briefly, because Tammy already touched on it, how this intersects with Thriving in Place. Next slide, please. So what I want to touch on first is state requirements. And the term moderate income housing gets brought up a lot in the state requirements, and I just want to provide a definition that means 80% of the area median income or below. That's just the terminology that the state uses, so that's, if you hear that, you know what it means. And then the state also requires, and there are changes kind of going on at the state level right now during this legislative session as well that will influence this, but for the most part, we have to provide a realistic opportunity to meet the need for additional moderate income housing within the next 5 years, which requires a needs analysis that we'll be going over and was submitted in the transmittal. We need to select 6 or more moderate income housing strategies out of a list of 24 that are in state code for implementation in order to be eligible for priority consideration for funding. And that funding includes transportation funding, which again, at the legislative session right now, they are talking about kind of what that means. So it's kind of in flux right now, but for priority consideration, we need to address 6 or more of the housing strategies. And then there also has to be an implementation plan element. Next slide, please. And Tammy mentioned this as well, so I'll be brief here, but Thriving in Place and Housing SLC have really been kind of married from the beginning in the way that they were approached. So even though things got off the ground a little bit earlier for Thriving in Place, outreach started in February and ran through April for kind of the phase 1 piece. Everything that we've done with Housing SLC took all of that information and took all of that engagement and built upon it. And we, took advantage of the same consultant to help us further our outreach efforts and really grow our bandwidth as staff in order to reach out to more populations than we could have otherwise. All of the policies are housing related, and we see those needing for efficiency's sake, if nothing else, to live in the same document, so that when referring to a housing related issue, we can say, go to the city's housing plan. And so we really do see them together, and we'll kind of be moving forward with that in mind, and that Housing SLC will include the findings from TIP. And so next slide, please. So for engagement, as I mentioned, TIP engagement started last February, and there were surveys, focus groups and interviews, youth engagement, community working group meetings, and all of that carried forward with Housing SLC. The community working group was essentially the same group of people. And what we did is, starting in July, we did tabling, we did pop-up events, we issued another survey, which was both online and paper. We held focus groups, we did other in-person events. One of the things that we were really focused on was trying to go to where people were. We know that online surveys are not the best at capturing a diverse array of resident sentiment. And so we really wanted to focus on reaching populations that may otherwise fall through the cracks as far as survey taking goes. So our paper surveys were located in homeless resource centers, at libraries, at community-based organizations throughout the city. And we wanted to prioritize hearing from renters and lower income households. So that's kind of where we catered our engagement around. Again, wanting to kind of be out in the community, hearing from people. So next slide, please. This slide shows across both TIP and Housing SLC efforts, we made contact with and heard from over 6,000 people. A lot of those, like almost 6,000, were from the 2 surveys that went out. And while we're happy with the response rate, we had 45% of respondents were renters, 40% earned less than $50,000 a year, 20% were Hispanic or Latino. We wanted to make sure that we were hearing from the right people, so we continued to do that in-person engagement. And we made sure that everything was translated into at least Spanish. For all of the materials, we had Spanish interpretation available at all of our events, whether that was through staff or paid interpreters. We did focus groups with renters, seniors, people experiencing homelessness, youth, people on the West Side, and BIPOC communities as well, in order to really kind of get a sense of what is needed. And this is very in line with what Thriving in Place laid the groundwork for, and so we just kind of carried that forward. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about the key findings from all the engagement and the data analysis that we did. But before I do that, I do want to just kind of preface by saying, while these key findings are specific to Salt Lake City, the story they tell is not unique to Salt Lake City. Housing affordability is something that every major city in the country is facing, and along the Wasatch Front, it's a topic of conversation. So this is, while the data is specific to here, the story is not. So the first key finding is that rental vacancy rates are low and home sale prices are unaffordable to most residents, putting strain on existing rental housing and causing rents to rise dramatically. So the Kim Gardner Policy Institute put out a report last fall showing that rents have risen in Salt Lake County 11% annually over the last 2 years, or around $321, which is a very sizable amount for the average household to kind of have to find in their budget. So, and this chart shows that this is also data from Kim Gardner Policy Institute, but of renter households, about 93% are priced out of buying the median priced home. So that's kind of the first thing that kind of our first key finding. If we move to the next slide, please. And so, with this, we've also probably all seen that there's a lot of housing going up right now, and has been for the last little while. So despite a housing construction boom, housing prices suggest a shortage of housing supply overall, but especially housing that is deeply affordable, which means affordable to those earning 30% of the area median income or below, and with a demand for housing outpacing supply. The chart shows that we are short about 5,500 units of deeply affordable housing, which is a lot. But not only that, there's also a shortage of supply elsewhere, kind of in the 80 to 100 or 80 to 125 plus income bracket. So that puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the affordable housing stock to meet everybody's needs. And yes.
So this seems to indicate that there's a surplus in the 30 to 80% AMI range. Is that true?
So clarification on the data, this takes all existing households. So there's nothing about potential demand in this data. It's all existing households and all existing housing stock. So what it's saying is that there's a mismatch in the type of, or the affordability of the housing and the households who need it. So this would say that there's a surplus in the 30 to 80% housing stock, but then you have to take into consideration that because there's a deficit in the 30 and below and the 80 and above, that all of those people are trying to get housing that's affordable. Like we don't, in Salt Lake City, and Thriving in Place talked about this as well, is that we don't have a super luxury market. Like we're not San Francisco where people are going to be paying $4,000 a month for like a couch, next to a bathroom. And so it's like, it's getting really expensive, but we don't have a super luxury house. And so what this data is saying that right now, high income households who are renting can find the best housing in the best neighborhood,
so these
pushing
numbers
everybody
all
else.
add up to zero.
Yeah, so this literally is a zero sum.
There's a whole bunch of people that need houses that do not have them and are living with their parents or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are not even counted for in this.
Right, and if somebody lives in South
you.
Salt Lake or Bountiful, they're not counted in this
It doesn't
either.
mean we should stop building 30 to 80% AMI. It
Yeah.
means, okay, I'm following. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is literally like zero sum on this. If you take from one, it takes or adds to another in this.
Thanks for explaining that.
And thanks for that clarifying question. But yeah, so deeply affordable is where the greatest need is, but we need to continue building affordability across the board. Next slide, please. And then because there's a shortage of affordable housing, we see, and this changed kind of in 2015 where the city flipped from being majority owner occupied to majority renter occupied. 50% or 52% roughly of all households are renters, and more than half of all renters are cost burdened, meaning that they spend at least 30% of their income on housing related expenses. That's inclusive of utilities. And the data shows that by some estimates, roughly 50% of all cost burden households are extremely low income households. So because there's such a shortage of housing at the most affordable rates, there's a lot of cost burden throughout the city. And this is specific to renters and doesn't deal with kind of homeowner cost burden as well, which is also can be an issue. So can we move to the next slide, please? And again, all of this is related data, but because there's a lot of cost burden, there's greater housing precarity, which kind of puts more people at risk of homelessness. And according to the survey that we ran, affordable housing and behavioral health services are the preferred options over additional emergency shelters and homeless resource centers as solutions for homelessness. So people really want to see housing and behavioral health services based on the survey responses that we received. They want to see those things before they see a new emergency shelter or homeless resource center. And the chart shows kind of the options that they had to select from, and you see that emergency shelters was not in the top 3, whereas housing and behavioral health were the top 2 right there. And then next slide, please. So along with this, based on the outreach that we did and what we heard, there seems to be a mismatch between the types of housing that the market is producing and what residents say that they want to see. Residents, what we heard is that they're perceiving most new housing as luxury. There's also a lot of really big buildings going in and not a lot of family housing. Whereas what people seem to be saying they want, based on our engagement, is they'd love to see more family housing, they'd love to see more missing middle housing, and they'd love to see affordability throughout the city. So the image is an image of a map that we digitized when we did in-person engagement. We asked people to put pins on a map where they'd like to see certain amenities. And we asked beyond just housing, but this only captures the housing amenities. And a lot of people would put the pin right in their neighborhood because they want to have affordable housing where they live because they feel that their neighborhood is not affordable. But then you also get people saying, well, this area of the city also needs more affordability. And so there really is this sentiment that everywhere needs affordability because everywhere is feeling pinched right now. And that really gets to our last key finding. So if you go to the next slide, please. Wages haven't kept pace with the cost of living, and especially housing-related costs, and the chart shows that. But residents are feeling increased stress about everyday expenses across the board. When we asked about transportation issues, free transit was the preferred thing to, more bike routes and safer roads. People want more access to free or reduced price amenities as opposed to kind of open space. So people are feeling pinched right now, and this chart is this is adjusted for inflation, the percentages. So you do see that especially median home sale prices have risen far faster than wages and household income has, and that's just really putting a lot of stress on the housing system as well as the residents who live here. And then if we go on to the next slide, this is my last slide. The proposed next steps. So next week I'll be presenting this same information to the Planning Commission for initial briefing, with the goal of having a draft available for public review end of this month, at which time I will transmit to ask to come back and present that full draft to you all so that you can see it. And then March, April, head back to the Planning Commission for a public hearing and recommendation, after which time I'd come back here to present the recommendation from Planning Commission ahead of your adoption process. So, and as Allison mentioned, April 18th, 12th, 18th is my drop dead day. So
That's
I'm going to
when we're
work
looking to
hard.
adopt or to get
No,
a
to
briefing?
get the final transmittal.
The final transmittal, okay.
Yeah.
Get
And
your
Allison, you're
taxes
saying
in
that
and get your
allows us to get it done
plan in.
before.
Well, that would allow you to have it briefed before we're in the thick of the budget, but the public comment time and
see.
space would
Will
be
be
during the
coincident with the
budget,
budget.
and then the potential action would also be during the budget.
And that's by state law. We must do it on that timeline.
It needs to be done by June 30th, so there's a possibility that it could,
But,
yeah.
I mean, within a week or
Yes.
two. Okay. Rudy, first of all, thank you for that. I found those statistics very interesting. I would, two parts to one question. I would like to, I guess I could look it up, but what are the 20 whatever strategies that could someone just email me a list of like what the state has of 20? I assume and hope that we're choosing more than 6 because we've always, as a city, tried to go above and beyond what other cities are doing for affordable housing. Do you have an idea of how many of those we are going to select?
As a point of reference, so I came in October, September sometime, and talked about the Growing SLC implementation plan. That was for the final year of Growing SLC. We addressed 12. So in 1 year, we addressed 12. Based off of the list, it looks like it'll probably be around 17, 18. So we're definitely going above and beyond the required, or like the 6 that will get us priority consideration.
Great.
And I can get you a list of the
That
full.
would be great. Yeah, I'd love to know which ones we're choosing, which ones we're not, and maybe why. Council members, other question? Dugan?
Just one of the policy questions from the staff report about the new programs in this and our current housing programs and other things that we have. How are we bringing those together and prioritizing those two lists into one manageable project or program?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the things that we're doing is we have a policy working group that meets and is reviewing everything, that has representatives from RDA, planning, housing stability. So we're talking through all of that. And, as kind of the project lead on this, what I don't want to do is put forth things that nobody's going to be able to implement, or that, because I'm not the one who's going to, I don't have any authority over like planning or anything like that. So I want to really make sure that there's buy-in and that people understand like this is our role over the next 5 years in this plan. And so some of that's taking advantage of current things that are going on. And this gets to your question, Councilmember Romano, is that like one of the strategies that we can select is using RDA housing set-asides. And it's like, well, the RDA is going to use that, and we're going to be able to count that towards our plan. So finding the things that we are already doing and can continue doing, maybe tweaking them, maybe trying to do them better, but that'll be part of it. Along with, with TIP, there's a lot of new things that have been kind of proposed or will be proposed that we're going to try to incorporate as well. So building on what we're already doing and moving forward, doing some new things to really help address the scale of the need that's out there.
I imagine we're doing things that are not in the state's list because I hope that we're on the bleeding edge of housing policy in the state. So we can hopefully inform other cities of what to do as well, and maybe increase that list of potential tools. Will housing SLC include all, like a more comprehensive list than just what 17 of 26 we're doing?
Yeah.
Or is it really only sticking to the state listed ones? And if so, maybe we could like have an addendum that says we're also doing.
Yeah, so that's a good question because the state list is how we get graded by the state. So we have to meet that requirement. But what the state list doesn't really contemplate at all is kind of renter protections, or there's not a lot about preservation of affordability. There's a few items, but it's like anything, there is like one catch-all item that is like, or anything else that you're doing to address. And so there's going to be a lot of strategies listed under that item. But then there will be, some items have multiple things that we're doing, some have one. So there will be more than just what's kind of the state mandate to meet those requirements, even beyond just like the 17 or 18 that we're choosing. We'll choose those, but then underneath each of those we'll have, 3 or 4 items that address kind of that one thing. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
And I'd love to brainstorm ways, and this goes to something that other council members have asked a lot for, but like brainstorm ways to evaluate all these different goals and programs against each other. How much money did we put into these ones, and how many units were created, or how many people were saved from eviction? Or I don't know exactly how to compare them apples to apples, because they're not all apples, right? So, but some way to for us to say, hey, this worked really well in Salt Lake, West Valley, you should do this too, or whatever. So, this is exciting, and I'm kind of glad that we have to do it faster because it's important. So, Councilmember Petrosler.
I know time is of the essence on this, but this feels like a really, really, really big thing, possibly the largest issue we'll be dealing with generationally. Would it be possible for us to get small groups before we get briefings on this?
I'm more than happy to.
I would really appreciate the option of a small group to go through it before we bring it to public forum.
That'd be great. I'd like to participate too. Council members, any other questions? Well, look at that. We're ahead of time now. Good job. Good job, team. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Allison. That's exciting. A potty break has been requested, so why don't we take 5 minutes, quick bathroom break, and then we'll be back at 5:37. Convene. I want to get your input on dinner. Do we want to power through? It's mobile, so you can take it home with you to your Valentine or whatever. Or do we want to take a dinner break after the next item or one or two items and then come back and finish after?
I have an opinion.
Yes, can I hear your opinion?
What?
Ouch.
I'm kidding.
I think powering through sounds like a great idea today. We
And
can all
take
snack.
Take dinner home with us?
We can snack as much as we can. And obviously, Dan Dugan is eating chocolate. And
Obviously.
and, you know, so
Wow.
let's power through
It
it.
looks like a cookie to me.
It's also staff's, time. They all deserve.
I would prefer that as well. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, let's not do a dinner break. We'll take dinner home with us. So let's move on to item number 7, which is discussing our unallocated U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department program income funds. We have Ben Ludke, Council Policy Analyst, Blake Thomas, Tammy Hunsaker, and Tony Milner here from Canon Housing Stability. See Ben and Tammy. So, item 7, yes.
Mr. Chair, I thought it would be helpful to start with a table the council may recognize from Allison's staff report last week to orient the council to what funding we're talking about, since there's a lot of funding for housing right now. Scott, could you put up the table on page 3 of the staff report? And then could you zoom in to the yellow highlights? Yes. So the focus of today's briefing are the amounts highlighted in yellow. These were funds that originated from HUD. They were loaned out through multiple programs. They were repaid, and then they were unused for several years. All of these funds highlighted in yellow do remain subject to federal requirements. You can see in one column, it's CDBG, $5.7 million. The column next to it is HOME, the Home Investment Partnership Grant Program. That's $8.6 million. And there's also $48,100 highlighted underneath them. See policy question number 6 about possibly adding that money into the $8.6 million for HOME, since it's subject to the same regulations from HUD. These are all one-time available funds. The council would need to amend the 2020-2024 consolidated plan to recognize this funding before it can be spent. And like the annual HUD grants that we get every year, this can go through an open and competitive process where anyone can submit an application who's interested. There would then be review and funding recommendations from the advisory board, as well as the mayor, and final funding decisions by the council. Scott, can you scroll down to attachment 1? So if we're just talking about the 5.7 million for CDBG, attachment 1 lists 34 eligible activities. So there's a lot of different things that can be done with this funding. And the middle column where it says yes or no, that is whether the current consolidated plan has that as an activity. If there's a no listed, we would need to update the consolidated plan to list this activity. The plan already needs to be updated to acknowledge the funding, so you could also update the uses at the same time. Unfortunately, what you will not see on this list is the public services category. If you think back to the annual HUD grants, there's that really long list of nonprofits that are seeking operating assistance grants, and that's where we have the least amount of money because HUD caps it at 15% of our annual CDBG award. We don't have the records to show the origination and uses of all of this $5.7 million. And without those records, HUD won't allow the city to use those funds for operating assistance to those nonprofits.
Can it be capital improvements that those nonprofits are seeking to do, just not operating? So like if a nonprofit needs to replace a roof or something? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. And then Scott, if you can go to attachment 2. This is a much shorter list. This is the $8.6 million from home. There are the eligible uses as shown on the screen, and all of these are already included in the consolidated plan. The administration is proposing 2 targeted populations for all of these funds, the CDBG and the home. It's over $14 million combined. The first is housing assistance for essential workers. These must be low to moderate income workers. That is required by HUD. They would not be limited to Salt Lake City employees. So you can also think of, say, nurses or teachers. See policy question 2 about how to define who is an essential worker if the funding were to go for this targeted population. There's not one definition, there's many.
What does HUD use for low and moderate income?
I believe it's 80% AMI or below.
That's,
Correct.
wow, okay.
And there's subpopulations in that, like extremely low income is usually 30% AMI and below.
Which is a good segue into the second target population the administration proposes. The second proposal is for creating deeply affordable housing. So these are new housing units for persons and family at 50% AMI or below. The administration is seeking the council's feedback about these 2 proposals, these 2 targeted populations. Do you support them? What questions do you have about them? Or whether there are other items on attachment 1 and attachment 2 that you would also like to explore. And Tammy has a short presentation with some additional considerations. Because it's HUD money, there are many strings attached.
You said many? Yeah, okay, sorry.
Thank you, Ben. If we could bring up the presentation. I can begin while the presentation is loading. So Salt Lake City is an entitlement city for CDBG and home funds through HUD. And Ben actually covered a lot of the details that I was going to cover pertaining to these funds. But to give you a better idea of how the accumulation of the funds happened, program income is funds received back to the city from a CDBG or a home funded activity. So if there was a loan that went out, the principal and interest that came back to the city is program income, or if property was purchased with CDBG funds and then later sold, those sales proceeds would be program income. Program income must be reported to HUD, and as Ben said, it's subject to all of the federal regulations in perpetuity. In addition, program income needs to be spent down first before new grant funds. So in a correct process, CDBG program income should be used by the city before using our annual entitlement allocation. So soon after moving into their current roles as director and deputy director, Tony Milner and Heather Royale, who's sitting behind me, identified that the city was not handling program income correctly. And they self-reported this to HUD and CAN leadership. CAN leadership then went to the mayor's office, and the mayor's office took this very seriously, and we're working to rectify the problem. And HUD is giving us the opportunity to bring all the program income into compliance. So this is a unique situation, and we're working with HUD. We want to be collaborative with you all and develop a plan. So the intent of this briefing is to give you information on how we got to this situation. I think last week we talked about some of the best practices to correct the situation and prevent it from happening moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony. Tony's going to give a little bit more detail on each of the funding sources and some of the federal strings attached, and then we're going to ask the council for some policy feedback and direction so we can kind of formalize a more specific strategy to bring back to you at a later date.
Good. Thanks, Sammy. Can we advance the slide?
I was going to mention, as Ben did, that there's the 14 million. That's the slide that we showed last week with the dormant PI or the unallocated PI highlighted in yellow. Take it
Good.
away, Tony.
Okay. And can we advance the slide again? Okay, so just talking about the timing and allocation considerations for these two sources of funding. One thing is basically the fact that by utilizing, Ben already said this too, kind of going to the detail that we do have to do a substantial amendment to our con plan, one, just to recognize the funds, and then if council identifies any additional activities that are in the current con plan, that would be an additional amendment. We also have to amend our annual action plan. All of that can be done at the same time. We have a citizen participation process and plan that's pretty strict that HUD asks us to do. And speaking of, since we're going to be having a couple of different HUD funding sources coming your way, you have this one in front of you now. You're going to be soon, we've already transmitted the one-time $3.5 million of home ARP. You'll see that pretty soon as well. And then our annual entitlements as well. So since we always have to kind of make sure that we're following all the process and procedures for getting public the opportunity to review and provide feedback on all of those different funding sources. We're going to be doing enhanced public noticing just to really make sure that the public isn't confused by this. We'll work with the different communications team and the council, the mayor's office, and civic engagement to really make sure that we're doing social media friendly, something as simple as like, hey, there's a lot going on with the city right now with HUD, your voice matters. This is how you can review and be engaged. So watch for that, and we look forward to working with council staff to do that as well. There will be, as it's been said, there will be strict expenditure timeliness requirements once the plans are adopted and amended to recognize the funds. The biggest clock that's going to be ticking is that once council, you make your decision, then we receipt those funds into HUD. Basically, we have like a one-year clock. Every year, the city is held accountable on May 2nd for meeting a spendliness time down. And there's a slide coming up pretty soon that I'll kind of show that and kind of give that example of exactly what that means. But that is kind of the biggest clock that's kind of ticking, especially just with the CDBG funds. It's already been said, funds can be awarded directly to projects or programs. That is something that you as a council do have in your power to basically direct those funds. Or if you do want to go through a competitive allocation process, we kind of mirror this kind of what we do with the annual entitlements, a review board, mayor, and then you guys for the final decision. Next slide. Okay, funding specific considerations. So this is just for CDBG. So eligible uses are generally capital improvements related to housing, economic development, and neighborhood improvements. Projects qualify by either serving LMI, which is low to moderate income individuals who qualify on it as an individual or a household, or we can actually serve LMA, which is low to moderate areas. And so that is something that is identifiable. We have a map in another slide just coming up to kind of just refresh your memory of what would be those areas. And those areas are really looking for, if it's going to be area-based, that's going to be like transportation related or economic development related improvements. Ben already covered pretty well the fact that only, we don't have the opportunity to pull out 15% of this or any funds for public services activities which aren't available. You will see the upcoming recommendations from the mayor pretty soon for this year, coming up fiscal year 23, 24, that's going to have the list of those applicants that applied for this year's public services. And then last, again, just the funds must be spent on pretty quickly. If you can go to the next slide. This is a great snapshot that basically says, so say for example, with those four, you can see there we have our annual grant, about 3 million, reallocated funds is about 1.2. Again, you'll be seeing this coming up in the 23-24 recommendations, as well as current program income, about $1 million. But then if we were to include this dormant program income, that's giving the city roughly about $11 million. So the clock basically is ticking. So come May 1st, so technically it's like May 1st midnight. So, but then our timeliness test is, we're fun with that. So at May, it's by midnight. So then May 2nd, our timeliness test is conducted, and we can't have more than 1.5 of our annual entitlement. So if we say have like $11 million at the time of that test is taken, we can only have $5 million that's sitting, not being utilized. That's what the timeliness test does. We've never missed a timeliness test so far since HUD implemented this timeliness test. It's really their way to be able to make sure that funds are being used in the community and not being held onto.
Can I ask a question about that? We're talking a lot about expending. Does the city award it? Does that count as expending it, or the nonprofit must actually build the thing that they're going to build?
Reimbursement-based build.
Wow. Okay. So projects.
So to clarify, I believe, so say the city
actually spend.
Say the city were to provide gap financing for an affordable housing development. The loan for that gap financing would actually need to close and the city dispersing the funds. But I think that the HUD would allow the project to be built in a reasonable time frame. Mm-hmm. So we'd have to spend the funds, they'd have to be transferred to the project, used, but the project would not have to be placed into service quite yet.
But it's essentially shovel ready if it's a capital improvement or some other way that the money, okay.
Right. It's
not just, we're going to put it here, and here.
So a lot of times when the council does approve gap financing, either through the RDA or city programs, there's a lag between the council approving the funds and the loan closing and then the funding actually being dispersed. So we're going to have to be very careful about those situations.
So, we talk about time crunches, this one.
And with the timeliness, it's my understanding that HUD, if you miss your timeliness measures, that does put future allocations of the block grants at risk.
Okay, let's get it done then. Okay, sorry, we cut you off.
Oh, you're good, you're all good. The next slide. Again, just to refresh your memories, this is the latest and most updated CDBG eligible map. The areas in blue are considered low-income areas for area-based. So that basically means everything here in blue has more than 51% of residents who are low to moderate income. And so this would be anything in blue would be necessarily if you were to direct any funding towards activities for transportation or economic development. Or it's kind of like what we call like neighborhood improvement. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just the considerations for home, so separate the ones we were just talking about with CDBGs. So the three things to mainly keep in mind though with home is that basically eligible uses are generally for housing development, financing, and rental assistance. No community housing development organizations, also known as CHODO's requirement, is part of this. We don't have any type of CHODO requirement that needs to be pulled out for this. However, our 25% match requirement from federal funds is still in place. Speaking about match just really quick, what we do for match is we've been tracking for years the amount of funds that come in through or identified through permit fee waivers or impact fee waivers, any type of development fee waivers, and we're able to then count that towards our private 25% dollar for dollar match for all the home funds that we've been getting through the city. So that would still be available as well. Okay, with that, let me throw it back to Tammy.
I will close out our presentation, but I just want to clarify that for the council because this is confusing. So we can't use the 15% of CDBG for the public services that all the nonprofits compete for. However, housing activities are still eligible. So NeighborWorks, CDC Utah, a few other nonprofits sometimes, often access these funds for programs such as home buyer assistance, or if they're doing their own rehabs of single-family homes for home ownership, other housing activities, rental assistance, that's still eligible. So there are ways for nonprofits to access the funding. We do need to consider the nonprofit's capacity in taking on a lot of additional funds because of these strict timeliness requirements. And they're also, in the process of utilizing the regular funds that they receive through the program. So if we could go to the next slide. Ben already went over this, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the administration, under the leadership of Mayor Mendenhall, did propose using a big chunk of this funding for new units of affordable housing with a focus on the essential workers and also extremely low income AMIs or units to help with the homelessness situation. So that's what the administration is proposing. We could do this by we could collaborate, CAN and the RDA on a NOFA specifically to target new units for these populations or for family housing or other populations that the council may wish to target. We could use the policies established through the RDA's Housing Development Loan Program, which is what the Housing Trust Fund morphed into. So it's still that one policy location, one process. We could issue an RFP or a NOFA through that method. If the council wishes, CDBG could also be used for like neighborhood improvements, as Tony discussed. Capital improvements are eligible in those targeted low and moderate income neighborhoods. What our purpose today is really to get your policy direction so we can go back as an administration, formulate a strategy that's based on your input, and then come back to the council with a proposal on exactly how to deploy these funds because there are those timeliness requirements that are really sensitive. So that's our plan and strategy, and we welcome your feedback.
So if I'm understanding the question is, on one level, do we agree with the overall goal of housing for essential workers and extremely low income
yes. Mm-hmm.
individuals and families?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's maybe the first level question. And then if the answer to that is yes, then do we agree with the direction of a NOFA, or what else? What other ideas, or how might we expend all of this money in the next few years or few months?
Yes.
So let's start with the first question, council members. Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. So I know that it was mentioned in the home funds that they, like rental assistance qualifies and home buyer assistance qualifies. Is it possible to to extend that idea and definition? This is like my lawyer brain trying to create some like new definition, so that it would include mortgage assistance, or is that like they're like, no, we're not going to do that?
So it would or wouldn't?
Would like mortgage assistance qualify?
I believe so.
don't believe so.
Okay.
Just because
Can
Tony's
we
probably right.
look at that
They-
and see if
in
there's a loophole?
in CDBG, if it, under housing, we had to do it with our COVID funds that we got with CDBG, and we were able to do it because we're limited to, they consider it an income payment. And so, but then they're limited to 3 months. But we will definitely check and just make sure to see if that is an option with home funds. In this.
I'm looking at the table that we included in the attachment, and under home, it does say home buyer assistance, down payment assistance, or acquisition. So we'd have to look at exactly what those definitions are.
That was sort of my thing, because I saw that, but like, can we be creative, or is there a way? And if and the reason I bring this up is because I feel good about sort of these populations that we're looking at, but one of the things I mentioned that as a goal of mine this year is the sort of alternatives to how we look at homelessness, and one of it is keeping people housed. And I really want to look and prioritize some of these programs like rental assistance and mortgage assistance. And if it's a 3-month income and we use part of those CDBGs, and I don't care if it's that we've identified a certain population, if that's what we need to do, right? I think the essential worker population may be right in that line. But I'd really like to not just look at construction of new units, but actually keeping people housed where they're at and beefing up some of those programs. And if that is, reaching out to Neighborhood House or other, areas that already do this and talking to them as well. And I want to caution us about saying, let's be careful of their capacity. I recognize that we have to have this done in a year and a few months, but when I've talked to a few people that are providers, they're like, if you give us the money, we will make it happen, right? And that capacity idea, I think we kind of like, oh, they don't have the capacity for it. I think that people can figure out a way to spend the money. So I'd really like to push that goal of rental assistance and hopefully figure out a way to be creative about some mortgage assistance or mortgage payments so we keep people in their homes.
Okay, questions are stacking up. We have Councilmember Wharton, then Petro, and then Dugan.
Okay. I don't want to spend like too much time looking backward, but I do have a question about most of these funds. Weren't they sort of over time got kind of lost in the couch cushions? So how is it that now all of a sudden HUD is going to do the test to say whether or not we're using these funds, and that just happens to align with the deadline of May 2024?
So HUD was not aware of these funds previously.
Okay.
It was Heather and Tony, when they moved into their current roles, who self-reported it to HUD.
Right.
And the clock starts, so HUD is working with us on a plan and an opportunity to bring these funds into compliance. So the clock starts once we recognize the funds in an annual action plan, which has not been done yet. So we're trying to get all of our ducks in a row on priorities and process before we recognize them in the consolidated plan and the annual action plan, and then the clock starts.
Okay.
Like, we want to have them ready to deploy.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, the reason that I'm asking, and way to go, both of you, on finding all of it and getting it all sorted, but I just want to make sure that we're not doing things that, or that this won't happen again for multiple reasons, but not least of which we don't want to jeopardize our future ability to get money from HUD. And as exciting as it is to find money, it comes with a lot of anxiety for me, because I'm like, anyway, I'm sure we all understand. So, and then do you think it sounds like we have all these triggers and all of these deadlines and one starts the other. Are you very confident about the ability for us to get all of this done and funds actually dispersed and expended by that deadline? Or do you think that how much opportunity for error is there in this process?
I'll take a shot at it, and then Tony can correct me when I say something wrong. So I think to correct the the missteps of the past to prevent it from happening again. I tried to explain this in last week's briefing, and I don't know if I did a good job, but what is happening now is we're including program income in the annual process to allocate funding. So the logs that you see each year, this year when it comes before you, it will have program income of $1 million. That's what we're anticipating to collect in program income over the next program year. So program income will be recognized by HUD. It'll go through the annual funding log process. It'll be included in the annual action plans. It'll be accounted for real time. Before it was just being put into a city account. So there's definitely process improvement that has happened.
Okay.
And I think in terms of, I think the housing staff is nervous that we could miss timeliness requirements. So I think that requires us to be extra diligent in our planning and our identification of projects and programs that we know we can deploy the funds in a timely manner. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, well said. The only thing I would add is just that when we talk to our HUD reps, they could have easily have requested that we write a check and we give that money back to HUD, and then we don't have access to that, and that's not able to be deployed for the beneficiary of the residents. So they did give us this opportunity. They have kind of walked us through. We meet with them monthly, if not more, and so they've been giving us fantastic advice through. They've been giving us guidance on the same thing of just about, how important it is to meet timeliness, try to pick stuff that would facilitate timeliness.
Right, okay. Yeah, no, and I guess I thought, I'm trying to remember back like what's normally presented to us in the briefing book during the budget, but I thought we were already kind of doing those things. So I heard you say that last time, so I appreciate you clarifying it further how it's different than in previous years. And then I'm glad to know about this update as well. It just feels like this is like a relay race, and if like one person trips, I want to, but the monthly meetings, I think that helps me feel better. So, but any of those other checks or anything along the way that you can speak to, I'd be interested to know more.
Okay, Councilmember Pui also wanted a question, so let's go fast with our next round of questions. Petro.
Okay, how do the administration's funding priorities align with one another? So are they separate things? I was just looking, our AMI right now, 100% is considered, according to Fannie Mae, is 102. So 50% puts us at 51.1. But our teachers, for instance, start between 45 and 65.5. And I would hate for our teachers who are starting at a higher rate, because they probably have more student loans if they're getting that higher rate of pay. I would hate for them to not miss out on this. So are they separate bullet points, or are they meant to be taken cumulatively, someone in excess of 50%? And then that leads to my second, which I won't do a follow-up, I'll do it now. The preponderance of this is likely to end up on the west side, since that's where there's the most land available and where it's most affordable. And so even though we're under the gun, I would really like to avoid inadvertent over-concentration of deeply affordable in our area. And we are, council member, feel free to correct me, I'm a huge advocate for workforce housing and getting that 45 to 65, 70% AMI going alongside that deeply affordable that we've already very graciously accepted into the community.
So the bullets are intended to be separate, workforce, and then we said 50% AMI and below, but really I think the mayor's priority is housing to provide opportunities for those at risk or currently experiencing homelessness, so extremely low income. And then workforce housing, that can be defined different across the country. With HUD funds, we have to stay at 80% AMI and below, so it would probably be the 60 to 80% range.
80%, but it's for a household of 4, right?
Well, the amount varies by, it's adjusted by household size.
Okay, Dugan, then Pui, then Valdemoros.
Thank you. Appreciate all the information here. Back to the priorities. So I wrote down deeply affordable and the essential workers. And the reason I'm adding the essential workers is I lived in the Bay Area for a number of years a long time ago when I was younger. And, you know, San Francisco and some of those Bay areas, prices were going so high that the essential workers, teachers, firemen, police officers, everyone that was needed to run the city couldn't live in the city. And I don't want that to happen here. And, you know, that goes back to the AMI location, is that those essential workers run the place, and I'd like to have them the opportunity to live in the city. So both of those would be my priorities on that. Essential workers, how we define that is important, but also the deeply affordable. The second question I just have is, when we talk about the consolidated plan, we have to update that. Is that a quick fix?
That's spelled out in our con plan, and the substantial amendment process is spelled out on there. It basically requires a 30-day public comment period for the public to weigh in, a public hearing, was a public comment period, 30+ days, public hearing as well for the public to weigh in. We take all that, and then once we've compiled all that, then we can submit it to HUD for review. They actually have to then sign off on it.
Right, they sign off on it, and then we can use that HUD funding. And does that start the clock, or, I mean, this May 1st date is started already? Or is that
So good question. So once they approve the substantial amendment, and then once it's procedural, we have to just go into their accounting system to then receipt those funds, and then that clock starts, but then that May 2nd date is always static, and that's always on the calendar.
So that's May 2nd date, it's already on the calendar, and we may not have authority to use that funding until late summer, at the late summer.
Yeah, so we're trying to time the approval process soon after the program year starts.
Okay, so these things, that's got a big snowball back there. All right.
Councilmember Pui.
So I guess you asked for direction, and I support what you guys are asking for from me. I do like to mention a few things mentioned here, and just to add my support to some of the things that were talked. The concentration is an important piece to my district, and obviously, if we're going to ask, issue INOFA, I'm sure we're gonna hopefully see projects that are gonna hit with the goals of the city, right? And that should, we're talking about family housing, we're talking about the income levels, we're talking hopefully about the diversity of incomes and the uses of these projects. And I'm hoping, since most of these things are going to happen in many parts of my district, that we are hitting those pieces. That's very important. But yes, I mean, I'm talking about something that is a few steps, forward. But that really is very important to me. Now, I also want us to think about leveraging our land. The many pieces of land that we have that could potentially make these projects go faster, or maybe some opportunities for these projects to actually be shovel ready faster, since we already own the land. And then we have couch money that we have found, millions of it. So I think that this might be an opportunity to use some of that land that we already own. Thank you.
A follow-up question to that. I mean, with the time, I think I'm not 100% clear on the timeline within which it must be expended, but my understanding is it's short, and so it seems like it would have to be projects that are already being planned and permitted, right? It can't be like the fleet block because there's no plans drawn or developed. Like this is only going to be able to go for projects that are already basically being worked on, right?
Right. The city does own some smaller parcels that we could
go quicker.
That could go quicker. Also, land acquisition is an eligible use, I believe. So to meet the timeliness required, like we could have that in INOFA, deeply affordable and essential worker housing, and acquisition is an eligible activity. So a developer or the housing authority or another community partner could apply for the funds to buy a parcel, and to meet the timeliness requirement, they would have to close on the property. The funds would be dispersed, and then they would have to develop the project within a reasonable time frame. HUD doesn't really define what that time frame is, but that could be a way to deploy the funds in a timely manner.
Okay, Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you. So I have 4 questions. One.
Okay.
Sorry, can we use the funds for city-owned property? So we have the old safety building that we have some sort of plans, and I know the mayor had mentioned that she would like to see affordable housing in that corner. Is this one project that it's eligible for these funds if we move fast? with the
Yes,
design
that's
and-
a large project, and I don't know if that could be executed within a year. Pre-development costs would be a qualifying activity, but what ultimately makes the use of the funding and the project eligible is what ends up being built. So if you use it for pre-development or, like I was saying, acquisition, HUD will still watch you and make sure that the ultimate project is developed in a timely manner.
All right.
Or the uses identified in the
Yeah.
Next one, if we need to do this fast, to me, something that we haven't talked about, it's eligible, is the commercial and industrial building rehab. I know we have a track record of using CDBG funds very well to do facade improvements in different neighborhoods, and I'm sure there's more applications than what the money that we have for them. So maybe if we need to use these funds, we want to get it done. The facade improvements are an easier and faster way to get done. So that's my suggestion, that you look into it as well. And I'm glad to see industrial building rehab, because I know in my district, the Granary district, but I know in District 2, like in around the Folsom corridor, there's some older, industrial buildings that could use the love. So, and it's in an eligible area, so that's why I'm thinking easy, fast, let's get it done and comply with that. Okay, then this is fast moving, so any of these funds eligible for a temporary manager to manage this, unless you guys have the bandwidth to do it. Because I think, so that nobody drops, like Councilmember Warren just said, like somebody drops the ball, then we're all in trouble. Maybe we do need to have one person overlooking it, the timelines with a whip. Hey, like, hey, did you do this? Hey, did you, like an assistant or a manager? Does that cover? Do these funds cover for the temporary manager?
So none of these funds include additional admin,
Okay.
but then the city does always, through our annual entitlement, set aside 20% of our new CDBG funds for the purpose of admin. And so, but there is room in those funds to possibly bring on a part-time person to help project manage. That is something that, if we could do an analysis of existing staff and bandwidth, and then possibly make a proposal for a part-time person to help with this.
For a year, yeah, and we go year by year.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so that, we're not stressing out, we have the extra help. And then I didn't understand how much we can use per year. So we cannot use the $20 million at once. We can only use 15% of it?
No, it has to use all of it.
Yeah.
All of it.
If we back up to that slide with the table, if we could, that's actually based on what we're actually estimating getting in the next program year. So this is for CDBG. Home, the timeliness is a little more flexible. So we'll take your feedback and strategize a plan, and considering the funding sources as well. But CDBG is the one with the really critical timeliness.
Okay.
So we're anticipating getting 3.3 through the standard annual entitlement grant, having 1.2 in reallocated funds from a project that didn't work out?
Right.
Like a recaptured funds. And then current program income, because we're using program income correctly now, that's estimated to be $1 million. And the dormant program income for CDBG is 5.7. So we're anticipating almost 11.3 million. And what we will have to have, we can only have 1.5 times the annual grant amount, which is the top number, the 3.3, in our account next May.
Okay.
So we have to use everything else.
Okay, all right.
Does that make sense?
That does.
Okay.
So
Got all day on the first.
Okay.
Thank you.
15 months.
So I'm hearing general support for the the two big goals, two priorities: essential workers and extremely low income, but also an additional idea of using the money for commercial facade improvements. Do we?
Commercial industrial.
That-
My rental and mortgage.
And Was that, wouldn't that fall in with, oh, you're saying rental and mortgage for not necessarily essential workers or deeply,
But I think what the thing was construction. So that was the main proposal, was that this would go for new units. I'm saying that's
Okay.
great. Let's also, for those
okay,
two
so there's two
populations,
additional,
I'm saying let's
ideas.
look at mortgage assistance and rental assistance for those populations.
okay, for
Probably
the same
mostly
populations.
essential workers, but you know what I mean.
So keeping the same target populations, but expanding not just construction of new housing, but also rental and mortgage assistance, as well as potentially adding commercial and industrial facade improvements. It sounds like straw polls.
That's enough direction to go get started.
Let's just
I
say,
I
does
would
everyone
like
agree
to
with that straw
discuss, yeah, for all of those things.
I'm good.
poll? Yes.
Okay. My discussion point was going to be yes, I love that idea, but I would also like to prioritize housing, but I can see the point, so I'll say yes on that as well. I do like that it's something that could go fast.
So that was unanimous?
Sounds like that was a unanimous straw poll to add those two additional things into the other goals. Are we good on that item? Thank you for explaining this. Thank you for finding it, and excited to get this money to work for us.
I don't need to straw poll this, but just, are you going to let our staff know periodically too what the updates are in case? Okay, that'd be great. Just, I would like to know that as well. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Are we still powering through, or are we taking a dinner break? We're doing it? Okay. Keep your questions short, people. We're on to item number 8, which is a resolution amending 2 Utah-UPACA interlocal agreements. And we have Jennifer Bruno, Danny Walls, and Allison Parks.
And I don't know that we need to have a long discussion about this in the work session because we had it in the RDA meeting. So this is just the city side of the same action.
So it's this exact same policy discussions. It's just we have to discuss it both in RDA meeting and in city meeting.
Because the city is party to the interlocal separately from the RDA.
Oh.
Katie, I'm like, who is she looking at?
Okay, so does that mean we don't need to?
It would be on a formal agenda on the council
Okay.
meeting next week.
Is
for
there
adoption.
any more questions by council members on this item? We all understand?
No.
Great. Okay, we good job. All right, now we're skipping our dinner break, and so we're on to item number 10, which is our last item. It is an ordinance about the local link study to update the 2013 Sugar House circulation plan. And we have Ben Ludke from council policy staff introducing the item, and then Lynn Jacobs and John Larson from the transportation division here to discuss this. Ben, go ahead.
Sorry. Sound check. The 2013 Sugar House Circulation Plan is proposed to be updated with the Local Link Circulation Study. And the study has 2 major parts. The first part is 6 recommended projects and 7 recommended policies. These are intended to address transportation gaps and barriers that were identified in the course of the study. There are 2 tables in the staff report, and there are policy questions next to each of the projects and policy recommendations. The second major part is a proposed locally preferred southern route for the S-Line streetcar. In 2013, the council adopted a locally preferred northern route for the Sugar House streetcar. If the council approves the study recommendations as an update to the 2013 circulation plan, then the city would have 2 locally preferred routes for the streetcar, one north and one south. You can see in attachment 1 the map for the southern route that is proposed. And attachment 2 is the northern route, which the council adopted back in 2013. It's the blue line. And we can put these on the screen if that's a helpful reference. Regarding role clarity, it's the council's role to identify the locally preferred routes, whereas the Utah Transit Authority is in charge of operating and maintaining those transit services. Since this would be an official update to a city plan, it did go to the Planning Commission. They forwarded a positive recommendation for the council to adopt the plan. The council would need to hold a public hearing and adopt an ordinance in order to make this update. I'll turn it over to John Larson, the city's transportation director, and Lynn Jacobs, transportation engineer, who conducted the study. They have a short presentation for you.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, John.
Hi, Council. Happy Valentine's. Great to spend it with you.
Yes. What you always dreamed of.
I'll just kind of provide the broader context on this and then hand it over to Lynn to talk about some of the specifics. So this, we got a county grant to do this analysis. Like Ben mentions, it really was two parts. One was the update to the circulation study, and then the second part is the transit element. It was a joint analysis led by Salt Lake City, but South Salt Lake, Mill Creek, and Holiday were all part of the study. And I believe Mill Creek has already adopted the transit element, and Holiday is in the process, and doesn't impact South Salt Lake. So I don't think that they are going to. With that, I'll turn it over to Lynn.
Yeah. Thank you, Council, for having us tonight. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to try to keep my presentation really brief. I'm not going to go with my slides. I'll just shoot from the hip and tell you where we're at. So I think, as was mentioned, we're recommending a southern alignment for our future transit route that goes to Mill Creek. But in reality, you would need both. Just to clarify that, if you have any questions about that. It does not make a lot of sense to build the southern part without also building the northern part.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I imagine that was a little confusing, so I figured I'd just shoot right out and clarify that.
Well, I love our neighboring municipalities, but I would rather close the loop for Salt Lake City residents first, or at the same time.
We
but
had
not second.
We had assumed for our study that the currently adopted alignment that you all, the council, adopted was in place. And so we...
Well, not us, a previous council.
Well, the previous council.
Yes, okay.
City council at large.
And if I can just clarify a little bit too, because we were right on the council and part of this, but we did this study, and it was a county study, so it helped us get what was it, almost $1 million for this study.
Correct.
By adding our southerly neighbors. It made, I think, right, we kind of talked about this, I think it made the application for it a little more robust in getting that money from the county to do this study, particularly with the fact that the northern alignment had already been adopted.
Yes. And it actually makes a lot of sense because we have these areas that are all growing, and we have what we know will be a huge transportation need between all of these polycentric developments, right? We've got all these centers of development that are happening. And so we know that we're going to need to have more capacity for moving people between them. We also know that it's really unlikely that we're going to widen any of these roadways to accommodate that future demand. 13th East, Highland Drive, it's just untenable to think about widening those. And so really one of the big tenets of this project was to say, what could we do instead of that in terms of walking, biking, transit use, to really focus on how we move people between these big centers of development. But back to that point, I mean, we modeled this with, well, what if we didn't have that northern piece in place yet? And it just did not look good at all. Like the ridership is not there. If we don't have the connection to the north, the connection to the south just doesn't make sense. The other thing that we learned is that it's probably a long ways off before we actually could see a streetcar on this road. The ridership forecast that we were getting in 2050 wouldn't really justify that. And we saw similar levels of ridership with an enhanced bus service. So what we're actually recommending that we do is an interim solution of taking our bus route that's on this corridor already, the Route 220, and trying to make it better, make it more frequent, upgrade the bus stops, really improve and enhance the visibility and usability of that bus line. And so we see that as a really good solution for the next 10, 20, maybe even longer years. But we know that eventually we're going to need more capacity in this area. The time will come. We're not quite there yet, but the time will come, and that's why we wanted to include this future vision for having something better.
Lynn, how is what you just described different than enhanced bus service?
What was that?
Maybe I heard you wrong, but I thought you said, okay, it doesn't justify streetcar right now. It doesn't also justify enhanced bus services,
It
but we're
does.
going to make the bus better? Oh.
It does.
I heard it wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If you dig into the
It
report.
sounds like enhanced bus
yeah,
service to me.
we are saying yes, enhanced bus
Yes,
service.
enhanced bus service, but not BRT.
Not BRT.
Okay.
So the differential between enhanced bus service and the BRT would be that the BRT would have an exclusive lane. In order to do that, we'd have to widen Highland Drive, and that's exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to go there.
Community didn't want that.
That isn't, and I don't think anyone does. I don't think that's a good move. But so enhanced bus is what we do want. And right now, the Route 220 and UTA service runs down this corridor. It used to not. They saw our local link study and actually modified their route for our recommendation. It runs on 30-minute headways. We'd say, well, let's bump it up to 15. And then if that works really well, let's bump it up to 10 and keep going. A lot of the bus stops along this alignment within Salt Lake City, we're actually already upgrading with our Highland Drive and 1100. And so that's really exciting.
But,
Councilmember Warren.
I mean, why is this, I don't want it to be 10 and 20 years long. And we have a lot of transportation funding available from the federal government. Do you really think it's going to be that long?
Unfortunately, I do.
Why?
Couple of, and I feel the pain. Couple of the thoughts that I'd share with you on that. For one, we're rebuilding Highland Drive right now and 1100 East, and we're not putting in the rail with it. And so we'll have a brand new road. I don't think we'll want to touch it for a while. I think we'll want to just let the business community breathe for a minute while we regroup. Our cost estimates for the northern alignment that were done a number of years ago, I think those were around $250 million to go north. I imagine that's a lot more now. That was a number of years ago that latest estimate was done. We didn't really evaluate that with our study. We were looking more to the south. To go to the south, it was more like $350 million. So if you were to do this entire alignment, it's $500 million.
Those numbers you're saying are for streetcar.
Streetcar.
Like the full rail.
Enhanced bus is more like 10 million. if
Right.
We
that.
call the streetcar a people mover, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
People mover.
It's just a people mover.
Yes.
It
People
doesn't do
mover is
anything
the
but move
20-year
people.
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The enhanced bus service could be much, much sooner.
Very fast.
But, yeah.
But that doesn't meet, Councilmember, are you saying that doesn't meet your goals or desires?
Well, yeah, it seemed like with the S line, there was, we had a different presidential administration that was less focused on transit. And now we have one that is putting a lot of money into transit. It seems like now is the time, and so, I understand, just reconstructing, but that we can't, I don't know. For me, that's a monumental thing like this that could be transformational is something that we should move faster on, I think.
Anything to add to that, John?
Yeah.
And how about 5 years?
We could.
Tear up the street again in 5 years.
Sorry, Amy.
So I think it's safe to say I don't want to put a timeline on it. It could go faster, but I think the best way to nudge that along is to have the bus service be wildly successful, and I think we're doing all the right things to make that happen. And so I think that if we can show really strong demand on the bus service, then that helps with making the case with UTA and then also for federal grants. And so it could be faster, but we just think realistically it's probably a ways out.
Okay.
But we won't necessarily be the limiting factor on that.
I'd love to see this enhanced bus become wildly successful, and then it's a no-brainer to upgrade it to something with a lot more capacity and a lot more use, But in the meantime, we create a route and we give it the best love that we can and try to make it really do well, make it competitive. that's been the thinking, kind of a stepwise progression, if you would.
Councilmember Dugan.
Thanks, appreciate this. Yeah, and I agree with the idea about the enhanced bus, because we'll get that on Foothill too. The question I have is on the cost sharing when we go down outside of Salt Lake City. And I can't find it now, but I thought I was reading how we were taking the burden on most of the cost, but is it cost sharing with Mill Creek and everybody else for the maintenance and everything? What's in the on the southern route?
So fundamentally, it'll be UTA's responsibility to operate and maintain this route. That's the way this would work. The big cost for us is in bus stop enhancements. We're already doing a lot of that anyway on this route. So
Okay.
it's actually it's a pretty good deal for us.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks, appreciate that.
And we'd love to see our neighbors to the south upgrade their bus stops too, but I don't think we're not gonna pay for that.
Right, but this study puts pressure on them to do that.
Right, all right.
Mr. Chair.
And thanks for putting them both together. I thought they were like separate. I was like, well, that doesn't kind of make sense. So thank you for linking them for me.
Linking.
Yeah.
Councilmember Pui.
Just a quick question. I wish we had more rail. I mean, I wish it was, 1 year, and so we started laying rails into our city. I have a question that should probably be answered in offline about maybe what is going to happen in the future of the granary, and if there is, what movement we're doing there to look into rail in there. But my question right now relates to bus stop enhancements, and listening to remembering some of the conversations that we had and some of the emails we have from neighbors. Sometimes they oppose. The neighbors oppose to have a bus stop in front of their house, and there is a lot of pushback. How do we prevent that from happening? Because now in my district, I have a lot of bus stops that are a concrete pad, nothing else. Yeah. And it's very sad to see that. We have a lot of people waiting in the snow. And I think it is a tragedy. And I know that, some people will have issues with, their view or whatnot. But I want us to start working on that ahead, instead of we have a bunch of concrete pads in these streets without shelter and without the enhancement that a good bus route deserves.
And I'm going to piggyback real quick, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Not only do we see that on the west side, but we just spent how many millions of dollars redoing 9th East, and there's not one bench. We took out a bus stop, and then we filled the sides of it with this size rock. So UTA won't even put a covered, like a glass covered bus stop on 9th East because it would just get broken. And that design, while I love the bike path there, it's one of my favorites. It's great. I think they're cool and should go everywhere. But that if we're enhancing things and we're trying to look at transportation, what happened on 9th East to totally forget the rider perspective, after spending so much time and energy and money on that project, is frustrating as all get out to me. And I truly, truly don't want to see that on Highland, on any of these other places that we're looking at bus enhancements, because it's like, I literally see people just standing on rocks. I had to complain that there wasn't ADA access to the bus. There wasn't an ability there. And that was just, it's frustrating. I have done a lot of yelling at people about that. So I don't want to yell at you guys for the 11th East one.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilmember Fowler. 9th East was one of the first bond projects, and we've really upped our game on complete streets. We did a lot of things right on that, but obviously some lessons learned. And on the Councilmember Pui, to your point with the blank pads, the concrete pads are important because they provide a flat ADA compliant connection between the sidewalk and the curb, so that people with mobility assistance devices people can access the bus. And we've, as a city, have put in about close to 200 in the last 3 years, citywide, and including 21st South and 21st East and South Temple and 9th West and 10th North. And we tried to work very closely with the property owners on the correct location. We moved them around a fair amount. We also tried to make sure that the spacing made sense, because if you start bumping them down too much, like one property owner doesn't want it, so you go to the next one, then the next one, then pretty soon the stops right next to each other. And so we're always trying to balance that. And also the size of the concrete pads, we tried to forecast along with UTA the ridership. And so not all stops have enough ridership to justify a full shelter. Some are just a bench. And then the challenge with the shelter is UTA is they have their shelter provider had a 2-year backlog because of the pandemic with getting the shelters, and so they've actually ended up dumping that vendor, getting a new vendor. We're told that this year we'll get a whole slew of shelters and benches, so that we don't just have blank concrete pads. But UTA's paying for those, and I'm going to blame COVID. So sorry for the delays on that.
I wanted to zoom out and ask maybe a higher level question. This is great. I'm excited. Anytime we can support enhanced public transit, I'm on board. But can you maybe just remind, since I don't think I was on the council when that grant was I here? When did we get that grant?
All the years
I
run
don't think I
together,
was
so I
here.
can't remember, but yeah, it was 2019.
Okay.
The study started in 2020 and actually was in spring of 2020, and
So the
there wasn't
question that I
anything going
have
on in
is
the world.
why, what was the policy discussion at that time as to why this route was prioritized to use for that study as opposed to places on the west side or wherever else? Can you just kind of remind me why this is the priority? I'm not saying it's not, I just want to know why.
This grant that we applied for from the county was this kind of unique idea that we had to say, well, Mill Creek and Holiday and Sugar House are all growing at such a rapid pace, and we need to have better interlocal planning where we're actually talking to each other. And so that's why this specific grant was earmarked for that area, if that makes sense. And so that's why it was this area that we're studying.
I'll add, it was also an update to the circulation plan, which had a heavy emphasis on walk and bike, which even though at the time it was only 6 or 7 years old, it was already outdated because of just the booming growth in Sugar House. And so I'd say the biggest driver is just the tremendous growth that Sugar House was seeing and is continuing to see. But we're trying to share the love also with other studies around the city since then.
At the same time, as this grant was kind of in the works, the city was negotiating with Mill Creek about their city center plan because we had land that was in city boundaries that they needed to complete their plan. And so in an effort of collaboration, I think all the parties agreed that this would be a great collaborative opportunity.
Okay, no, that was a very helpful answer. Thank you. No, I mean that
Totally appropriate.
That did answer my
That's
question.
true.
So thank
Well,
you.
it also really helps because the previous plan was really good, and we've actually completed most of the recommendations from that plan. But it was focused on the business district itself, and this is more about how do we get people to our Sugar House Business District. So, and that's, I've completely glossed over our circulation study. That was a whole nother component of this plan. Recommendations about how to complete the Parley's Trail in our Sugar House area, complete street improvements on 27 South. We've actually done a few of the things that are in the plan already, just by getting things done. So
if I'm looking at the agenda, we will have a public hearing on this next week, and then we would looking to potentially officially adopt it on the 7th of March. Is that accurate? And it becomes an actual transit master
city
plan.
Yes.
City plan. Okay.
And if I can just
Councilmember
add
Fowler,
one more
go ahead.
thing, and the bus enhancement would not include trying to condemn anyone's property on any street going through Sugar House,
right?
Absolutely not.
That's what I thought.
Let's get that crystal clear on the record.
Crystal
We're not
clear
condemning
out
any
there.
property.
No, generally when we're doing our bus upgrades, we fit within our right of way. We don't like to purchase or acquire property for bus stops because the process is just so long and laborious that we just don't want to do it, and
Well,
it's
and
not the right
having-
fit for the
Living
neighborhood.
on 9th East and having gone through that upgrade and all of the things, and there is a bus area, nobody approached my property owner about purchasing land to increase the bus route. So
No.
crystal clear, nobody's houses are getting condemned.
If you read the report where it says enhanced bus, it says property impacts, and there's a big 0. So
Thank you, Lynn.
hopefully
Not
that
taking
helps.
any houses.
When
No
the
houses will be-
upgrade to a streetcar
houses.
happens, it also does not require widening the roadway, but there would be a need to acquire some small parcels of property for the power for it. But, you know, it wouldn't be something where you go condemn someone's property. You'd have to go out in good faith and try to negotiate and find that property. That's part of the added expense, right?
Any other questions on this, council members? All right, I think in that case, thank you very much for this
Thank
presentation.
you for your time.
Thank you, and I'm excited.
We are on to report of chair and vice chair. My only report is to have a good Valentine's Day. Do you have any report, vice chair? I think there's one thing we need to discuss on the reports from the executive director.
Of sorts.
We just need to get the council's approval to start early advertising for the North Point Small Area Plan. That'll enable us to complete action on that plan in March.
I support this.
Okay.
Great.
Sounds great to me. So it sounds like we support that. There is no closed session scheduled for this, and so with that, we are adjourned.